Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley, the place where stories linger long after the lights go out. Tonight, we prepared chilling tales paired with the soothing sound of rain to ignite your imagination and make your heart race. If you feel the cold creeping in, tap that like button. It helps keep the shadows alive. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from or share the scariest moment that sent shivers down your spine. Don't forget to subscribe. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the darkness ahead. A dangerous beacon in Maine. I had been driving for hours along the winding coastal roads of Maine, the tires humming against the wet asphalt, the rain falling in a soft mist. The weather matched my mood, distant, introspective. I had always been drawn to the isolation that the sea offered, its vast emptiness stretching for miles beyond the horizon. And the lighthouse I was heading to, perched on a jagged cliff, seemed like the perfect place to seek out solitude. When I finally reached the lighthouse, it loomed like a silent sentinel against the gray sky. Its stone walls were weathered and worn, a testament to years of battle with the relentless elements. The light atop the tower flickered on, casting long shadows across the rocks below. I couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward it, like it was calling to me, urging me to come closer. I parked my car and made my way to the entrance. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the old lighthouse keeper. He was hunched over, his long coat drenched by the rain, and his white beard tangled like the seaweed that clung to the cliffs below. His eyes were sharp and clear despite his age, and when he looked at me, I felt an unsettling shiver run down my spine. "Not many come here," he said, his voice rough and gravelly, like it had been shaped by years of wind and sea. "I'm just looking for some peace and quiet," I replied, attempting to sound nonchalant. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied me for a moment, as if weighing whether or not to let me in. Finally, he nodded, but his gaze never wavered. "You should leave before nightfall," he warned, his tone low but firm. I raised an eyebrow. "I'll be fine. I'm just here for the night." The keeper's expression darkened. "You don't understand," he muttered, glancing nervously toward the sea. "This lighthouse, this place, it's not what you think. After dark, you must stay inside. Do not go near the cliffs. And for God's sake, do not look out to sea." His words hung in the air like a dark omen. I laughed, a nervous chuckle escaping me. "Come on, it can't be that bad. I've been to plenty of lighthouses before." He gave me a long, hard look and then slowly turned toward the narrow staircase leading up into the tower. "Maybe you'll understand soon enough," he muttered, walking away without another word. As I stood there, the wind howled outside, and the lighthouse seemed to groan in response, as if it had heard the keeper's warning 1,000 times before. My unease grew, but I shrugged it off. After all, I had come here to escape the noise of the world, not to be told what to do. But as the door slammed shut behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something far darker than I could have imagined. The inside of the lighthouse was exactly what I expected, dusty, quiet, and untouched by time. The smell of old wood mixed with the salt of the sea, and the low hum of the wind outside was the only sound. I ran my hand along the railing of the spiral staircase that led to the top. It was smooth from years of use, but it felt cold under my fingertips, like it had absorbed the chill from the ocean. I shrugged off the keeper's warning. After all, I was here to escape the worries of everyday life, not to let some old man's superstitions take hold. I glanced out the small, weather-beaten windows that lined the walls of the tower. The view was stunning, the rugged coastline stretching endlessly in both directions, waves crashing relentlessly against the rocks far below. I stepped out onto the small balcony that wrapped around the lighthouse. The wind had picked up, sending my jacket billowing behind me. The air smelled fresh, sharp, like freedom. But as I gazed out over the churning sea, I felt a strange unease settle deep in my chest, as if something was watching me from the shadows. Shaking off the sensation, I turned back inside, hoping to explore the rest of the lighthouse. There was a long hallway leading to a few small rooms, each with nothing but dusty furniture and shelves of old books and maritime relics. It was a history of loneliness, each artifact a reminder of the keeper's solitary existence. In one of the rooms, I found a collection of old photographs. Some of them were faded, others were in black and white, showing the lighthouse in its prime. In every one, there was a figure, always the same man, standing at the base of the lighthouse or staring out to sea, his face solemn, his eyes distant. I wondered how long he had been the keeper here. I flipped through the photographs idly until I came across one that made me pause. It was a picture of the lighthouse, taken at night. The light at the top of the tower was ablaze, but there was something wrong with the image. In the shadows beneath the light, barely visible, were several figures, pale, transparent shapes that seemed to drift in the air. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the light, but the more I looked, the more it felt like they were moving, reaching out toward the camera. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to look away. I didn't believe in ghosts. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the photographer had used some kind of exposure trick, or maybe the photo had been damaged over time. I shook my head, trying to clear the creeping sense of dread that clung to me. I stepped back into the main room, only to notice a strange sound, a faint scraping noise, as if something was being dragged across the floor above me. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the house settling, but then the sound came again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere above. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. The keeper had said not to go near the cliffs, but he had also warned me about something else, something about the night. But the sun was still high in the sky, and the lighthouse seemed calm. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was slowly coming alive around me, that the silence was no longer as peaceful as it had seemed before. With a quiet sigh, I made my way up the stairs to the top of the tower, brushing off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. Maybe it was just my nerves, or maybe it was the isolation of the place, but something told me that the lighthouse was hiding more than it seemed. As I reached the top and looked out over the ocean once again, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that perhaps the keeper's warnings weren't as easily dismissed as I had hoped. The afternoon drifted by slowly, the hours blending together in a quiet haze. I had explored every corner of the lighthouse, but despite my best efforts to dismiss the strange feelings creeping under my skin, something wasn't right. The air felt thick, the atmosphere dense with secrets. I knew I needed to understand more about the place, so I ventured downstairs to the small room near the entrance where the keeper had been earlier. The door was slightly ajar, and I knocked before stepping inside. The room was sparse, but a large, wooden desk sat near the back, piled with papers, maps, and a few old books. The keeper wasn't in sight, but the faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, as though he had just been there. I hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the desk, drawn to the yellowed pages that lay scattered across it. It didn't feel entirely right to snoop around, but curiosity tugged at me. I reached for the closest stack of papers and flipped through them. The first few were filled with old lighthouse logs, mundane records of weather patterns and maintenance schedules. But then I found something that caught my eye, notes in the keeper's handwriting, scrawled in frantic, uneven strokes. They were dated years ago, but the ink was still fresh, almost like he had written them yesterday. Visitor 314 disappeared last night. No trace. The voices are louder now. I see them every time I turn my back. The light is failing. I felt my heart race. There were more notes, each one describing odd occurrences, disappearances of visitors to the island, strange sightings along the cliffs, and eerie noises in the night. The language was erratic, as if the keeper were becoming unraveled. One entry made my blood run cold. Something is wrong with the sea. I hear them calling me from below, the ones who never left. They cannot be allowed to escape. I can't leave. I won't. I quickly skimmed through more of the notes, each one more disturbing than the last. They painted a picture of a man losing his grip on reality, convinced that the lighthouse itself was alive, drawing in souls from the sea. His notes mentioned something about a pact, something the lighthouse keeper had made long ago to keep the spirits at bay. The more I read, the more I began to understand that this wasn't just superstition, it was something much darker. I flipped through one final book, an old journal filled with withered pages. The entries here were more coherent, but the subject matter was just as unsettling. It chronicled the history of the lighthouse, detailing its construction and the many keepers who had come and gone over the years. But what struck me were the accounts of visitors, strangers who had come to see the lighthouse, only to vanish without a trace. It had happened more than once, and always in the same way, during the night, when the light would flicker and strange noises filled the air. People would hear voices calling them from the cliffs, and when they tried to leave, they would find the paths blocked. By morning, they were gone. The final entry in the journal was particularly chilling. It read, "The light calls them. It calls to those who are lost, who wish to escape. But those who listen, they never leave. The lighthouse is a prison for souls." I felt the weight of the words pressing down on me. The keeper had known. He had known for years, yet he stayed trapped like the others. His obsession with the lighthouse, the strange behavior, it all made sense now. I looked up from the journal, my pulse quickening. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. The walls of the lighthouse seemed to close in around me, the very air thick with a presence I couldn't explain. Suddenly, I heard the creak of the floorboards behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the dust and the shadows stretching along the walls. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight. The keeper had warned me. He had tried to protect me, but I had brushed it off. Now, I understood. The lighthouse was more than just a beacon for ships. It was a prison, one that held the lost souls of those who had come too close. And now, I was trapped. As the hours passed, the sun began its slow descent beneath the horizon. The sky shifted from pale blue to a dull orange, casting long, eerie shadows across the rocky coastline. I could feel the change in the air, something heavy and oppressive, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. The lighthouse, which had seemed so still and safe during the day, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in around me. I couldn't shake the images from the keeper's notes, the disappearances, the haunting whispers, the souls trapped by the light. His words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over, "Do not go near the cliffs. Do not look out to sea." I tried to tell myself that it was all just superstition. Old man ramblings, nothing more. But the unease I felt was real. The world outside had changed with the setting sun. The winds had picked up, howling through the cracks in the lighthouse, and the sounds of the sea grew louder, more frantic. The waves seemed to crash against the rocks with greater force there. Deep, rhythmic roar vibrating through the very floor beneath my feet. It was as if the ocean itself was alive, restless, and demanding attention. I paced around the main room, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The fire had long since burned out, and the chill in the air grew stronger by the minute. I grabbed my jacket, pulling it tighter around my shoulders, though it did little to protect me from the creeping cold. Outside, the wind whistled like a mournful wail, and I couldn't help but glance out the window. The sea was churning violently, dark waves crashing against the cliffs in a violent frenzy. The lighthouse light, which had once seemed like a beacon of safety, now flickered uneasily, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to shift with every passing second. My heart pounded as I watched the waves. There was something unsettling about the way the water seemed to move, as though it was alive, watching me. I felt drawn to it, as if the sea was calling to me, pulling me closer to the edge of the cliff. My mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. What if the keeper was right? I could almost hear his voice, low and urgent, warning me once more. Don't look out to sea. But the pull of the ocean was irresistible. My feet moved on their own accord, carrying me toward the door. I hesitated at first, torn between the logical part of my mind telling me to stay inside and the irrational, primal urge to see what was out there. I stepped outside, the cold wind biting at my face, my heart beating faster with every step I took toward the cliff's edge. The lighthouse towered behind me, its light now a harsh, trembling glow in the darkening world. When I reached the edge, I stopped and gazed out into the darkened sea. The waves were higher now, crashing with fury against the rocks far below. But it wasn't just the sound of the waves that unnerved me, it was the shape of them. There was a strange rhythm to the way they moved, as if they were alive, shifting and pulsing with an unnatural force. Then, I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a shadow in the water, something moving just below the surface. But as I stared harder, I could make out shapes, figures, swimming just beneath the dark water. Their forms were indistinct, but there was something unnervingly human about them. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but when I looked again, the shapes were gone. All I could see was the roiling, restless ocean, a mass of dark waves crashing violently against the rocks. I took a step back, my breath shallow, my chest tight with fear. It's just the wind, I told myself, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. But the unease lingered, like a thick fog surrounding me. The wind howled again, louder this time, almost like a voice, though it was impossible to make out the words. I turned to head back inside, but as I did, something caught my movement out of the corner of my vision. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. The lighthouse stood still, dark and silent behind me. Yet the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. It was as though something was out there, in the depths of the sea, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door behind me. The flickering light cast long shadows across the room, and the air inside felt colder now, heavier. I didn't know what I had seen out there, but I knew one thing for certain: the keeper's warning wasn't just a superstition. Something in that lighthouse, something in the sea, was waiting. And it was only a matter of time before it came for me, too. Night fell swiftly, as it always did in these parts. One moment, the world was bathed in the last orange glow of the setting sun, and the next, the sky was a deep, ink-black canvas dotted with stars. The lighthouse's light flickered again, casting sharp, erratic beams across the darkened sea, but even that didn't seem to offer any comfort now. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the howling wind and the ceaseless crashing of the waves against the cliffs below. I sat by the window, staring out into the black void of the ocean, my mind caught between dread and curiosity. The keeper's warning echoed in my ears, urging me to leave, to turn back, to get away from the lighthouse before it was too late. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this place, this lighthouse, held something I needed to understand. I couldn't leave just yet, not without knowing the truth. I stood up, moving away from the window and pacing the small, cold room. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the silence was deafening. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming too fast for the calm of the room. I looked at the old clock on the wall, its second hand ticking slowly, almost deliberately, each movement louder than the last. It was like the lighthouse was counting down, preparing for something, and I was the only one left in the dark. I thought about leaving. I thought about packing my things and running, driving off the island before the darkness took hold. But I couldn't. The pull of the place was too strong, its grip tightening with each passing second. There was something here, something ancient and powerful, and I had to know what it was. I glanced toward the door. The wind had picked up again, rattling the windows and making the building groan under its force. I had to admit, the keeper's warnings had done their job. There was no denying the tension in the air, the growing sense of danger that had taken root in my chest. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if staying was the only way to uncover the truth. I walked over to the stairs and looked up toward the tower. The lighthouse beacon was now fully illuminated, its rotating light cutting through the night like a blade. I felt its cold gaze on me, pulling me toward it. No, I'm not afraid, I told myself. The thought didn't convince me, but I ignored the doubt and began to climb. Each step up the winding staircase felt heavier than the last, the old stone beneath my feet cold and damp, the air growing thicker with each rise. By the time I reached the top, my hands were clammy and my heart was racing in my chest. I pushed the door open and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind hit me like a slap, biting at my skin and tugging at my clothes. But despite the cold, I stood still, my eyes locked on the vast expanse of ocean stretching out before me. There was no turning back now. The sea had transformed in the darkness. The waves no longer crashed in chaotic bursts, but seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate rhythm. There was something hypnotic about it, a motion that felt unnatural, like the water was breathing in time with something else, something unseen. The shadows on the water shifted, flickering like whispers in the dark. It was impossible to tell if what I saw was real or just my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't look away. I could hear the voices again, distant at first, but growing clearer with every passing second. They weren't words, not exactly, but a steady rhythm of sounds. A low murmur, like a chant, rising and falling with the waves. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding me in an invisible cocoon. It was the sound of the sea, I told myself. The wind and the waves playing tricks on my senses. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was something out there. Something in the water, in the night, in the very fabric of this lighthouse. The light above me flickered again, its beam sweeping across the blackened sea, cutting through the shadows. And then, in the brief moment of darkness between the flashes, I saw it. A figure. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of the mind. But then it moved, its shape breaking free from the water, rising like a ghost from the depths. My breath caught in my throat as I took an instinctive step back, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the shape of a man, pale, gaunt, and stretched unnaturally thin. His features were indistinct, lost in the shadows, but his eyes, His eyes were clear, glowing with an otherworldly light. He stared directly at me, his face locked in an expression of desperate longing. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figure reached toward me, his hand stretching, fingers trembling as though he wanted to grasp me, to pull me into the depths of the sea. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a simple warning. This wasn't a matter of superstition. The lighthouse wasn't just keeping the sea away. It was trapping something far worse than I had imagined, and it was waiting for me to make a choice. I could stay here and face whatever was coming, or I could leave and never look back. But there was no way to leave now. The darkness had claimed me, and the lighthouse had no intention of letting me go. The night passed slowly, each minute stretching on endlessly as I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The lighthouse creaked and groaned under the weight of the wind, its tall tower standing against the relentless pressure of the storm outside. The light, though steady, flickered intermittently, casting fleeting shadows across the room. The sea continued to crash against the cliffs below, but the noise had become almost comforting, a constant, predictable rhythm that allowed my thoughts to wander. Sleep didn't come easily. My body was exhausted, but my mind was awake, sharp, filled with the unsettling images of what I had seen earlier that evening, the pale figure rising from the ocean, its eyes glowing with hunger. I kept seeing that face in my mind, even though I tried to push it away. Just as I began to drift off, my thoughts were interrupted by a low hum. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, like a distant whisper carried by the wind. But as I listened, it grew louder, steady and persistent, like the hum of a large machine in the distance. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The room was still, too still, the air heavy with a kind of oppressive silence. The wind outside had quieted for a moment, and in that lull, the hum became more pronounced. It seemed to vibrate through the walls, sending a faint tremor through the floorboards. My heart began to race, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind, the structure of the lighthouse settling. It was an old building, after all. The hum could easily be the sound of the metal beams adjusting to the cold night air. Or maybe it was the light, the rotating beacon that had a mechanical sound I hadn't noticed before. I lay back down, trying to relax, but the noise didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, as though it was coming from just beyond the walls. It was low, vibrating, the kind of sound that didn't quite make sense in the quiet of the night. And then, just as my mind was about to convince me that it was nothing but the lighthouse itself, I heard something else. Footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was faint at first, like the tap of a boot against the wood, but as the seconds passed, it became clearer. The steps were measured, rhythmic, moving across the floor, coming closer, getting louder. I glanced toward the door. It was shut tight, and I hadn't heard anyone come in. My pulse quickened as the footsteps continued, closer now, right outside my room. The hairs on my arms prickled, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe the lighthouse keeper had come back, though I hadn't seen him since dinner. He hadn't warned me about staying the night, but I hadn't expected him to return either. It was possible that he was just checking in on me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to ignore the fear creeping up my spine. I tried to reason with myself, to rationalize the sounds. It's probably nothing. It's probably my imagination. The lighthouse is old, things creak, things settle. But the footsteps didn't stop. They moved across the floor in a slow, methodical pattern echoing in the otherwise silent building. I gripped the blankets tighter, my heart thudding in my chest. I sat up again, my eyes darting toward the door. The footsteps stopped right outside, and for a moment I could hear nothing but my own ragged breathing. The air in the room felt thicker now, colder. I strained to hear anything at all, but the silence was deafening. My mind was filled with questions. Who was out there? What did they want? I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet brushing the cold floor. The hum was still there, barely perceptible now, but the footsteps were gone. I hesitated for a moment, then stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. The door was closed, but I knew that if I opened it, there would be no one on the other side. I just had to be sure. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled as I twisted it, pushing the door open just a crack. The hallway outside was empty, dimly lit by the flickering light of the beacon, casting long shadows along the stone walls. There was nothing, no sign of anyone, no sound of footsteps. Just the lingering hum in the background and the rush of wind against the lighthouse. I stood there for a long moment, my mind struggling to catch up with the confusion and fear that churned inside me. I glanced down the hallway, but all was quiet. Had I imagined it all? It was possible. I was alone in a strange place, my nerves on edge after everything that had happened since I arrived. Maybe the hum was just the wind playing tricks, and the footsteps, well, they could have been anything. But deep down, I knew. I had heard what I had heard. There was something in the lighthouse with me. And it was only just beginning. The days bled together in a haze of unease and confusion. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the isolation of the lighthouse and the eerie atmosphere were playing tricks on my mind. But every time I stepped out into the cold sea breeze or climbed the winding stairs to the lighthouse tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, a shadow at the edge of my vision, a movement too quick to catch, like a trick of the light. I dismiss it as the wind shifting the branches of a tree or a gull passing in the distance, but each time, the feeling of being observed lingered a little longer. I couldn't explain it, but there was a subtle shift in the air, a constant tension that made my skin crawl. The lighthouse keeper had warned me about staying out at night, but it wasn't just the night that unnerved me anymore, it was the whole place. The longer I stayed, the more I felt as though the island itself was alive, watching me, waiting for something. The air, thick with salt and mist, seemed to press in on me, and every creak of the building echoed through my bones, making me feel smaller, more insignificant. It was late in the afternoon when it first happened. I was walking along the cliffside path that wound around the lighthouse, the wind whipping in my coat, when I saw it, a figure, standing at the far edge of the rocks, barely visible against the gray sky. It was too far away to make out details, but I could see its shape, tall and thin, like a man, but something was wrong about it. The figure was motionless, staring out to sea, and even though it should have been impossible, I felt as though it was looking directly at me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and I was unsure if what I was seeing was real. My heart pounded in my chest, and I rubbed my eyes, willing the figure to disappear. But it didn't. It was still there, just standing, unmoving, as if waiting for something, waiting for me. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Something deep inside me urged me to go closer, to approach, to know what this figure was, to see if it was real. But before I could take a step, the figure turned and vanished into the mist, as though it had never been there at all. I stood there for a long time, staring into the empty space where the figure had been, trying to convince myself that it was a trick of the mind, the result of too much solitude. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It had been real. I walked back to the lighthouse in a daze, my mind racing with questions. Could it have been a person? The keeper? But the figure had been far too distant, and the keeper had been inside the lighthouse all day. No one could have reached the cliffside without me seeing them. It didn't make sense. As I passed the lighthouse, I glanced up at the tower, my eyes drawn to the light. It swept over the landscape, the beam of the lighthouse cutting through the thickening fog. And that's when I saw it again, another figure, this time much closer, standing just beyond the edge of the light's reach. It was a fleeting glimpse, and just as I blinked, it vanished into the shadows. This time, there was no doubt. I had seen it. This wasn't my imagination. It was something real, something unnatural. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum had returned, low and insistent, vibrating through the walls of the lighthouse, like a distant whisper in the dark. It made my head ache, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and move of their own accord. The footsteps, too, had come back, soft and deliberate, circling the room as I lay in bed, too afraid to move, too afraid to acknowledge what was happening. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had been wrong. This wasn't a simple case of nerves or isolation. There was something in this lighthouse, something waiting. The figures I had seen, the strange noises, this was no coincidence. They were signs, and they were only just beginning. I had thought the lighthouse keeper's warnings were nothing more than old superstitions, but now, with every passing hour, I could feel the truth creeping closer. The lighthouse wasn't just a place. It was a gateway, a prison for something ancient and desperate. And now that I had seen it, now that I had acknowledged its presence, it would never let me leave. The supernatural wasn't a myth. It was real. And I was trapped in its grasp. The days blurred together in a haze of fog and salt air. Each one felt like a repetition of the last, a never-ending cycle of waking, eating, and wandering the cold, empty halls of the lighthouse. It was as if the island itself was pressing on me, making everything feel heavier, more suffocating. I kept telling myself that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just exhaustion. There was something wrong with this place, something I couldn't see, but could feel gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I found myself waking up earlier each morning, unable to stay asleep for long. The nights were the hardest, filled with strange dreams that left me restless and sweating. In those dreams, I was always at the lighthouse, standing at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the dark, churning sea. The wind howled, and I could hear voices calling to me from the depths, familiar yet unrecognizable. It was as if someone, was trying to pull me into the water, to drag me down into the cold, endless darkness. And every time I woke up, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though I had just missed something terrible. The lighthouse keeper's warning echoed in my mind, but I had long since dismissed it as mere superstition. After all, nothing had happened to me. Not really. I'd heard strange noises, seen figures in the distance, but no one had come to harm me. The sounds of footsteps, the hum in the walls, the fleeting glimpses of shadows, they were just my imagination, my mind making something out of nothing. I was alone, isolated, and it was no surprise that I was starting to crack under the pressure. But that night, something changed. I don't remember exactly when it happened. One minute, I was standing in my room, trying to decide if I should go out and explore more of the island, and the next, I was walking toward the lighthouse, drawn by an irresistible pull. I didn't know why I was going there, only that I had to. The fog had thickened, wrapping around the lighthouse like a suffocating blanket. The beam of the light swept across the landscape, illuminating the trees, the rocks, the cliffs. But the light was uneven, flickering, like it was struggling to stay lit. I could feel the hum beneath my feet again, vibrating through the ground, but this time it was different. It was deeper, more insistent. As I drew closer to the lighthouse, the world seemed to distort around me. The sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs grew distant, muffled, as if the sea itself had receded into another world. The air was thick with fog, clinging to my skin, making everything seem unreal. The lighthouse loomed ahead, its towering presence casting long, twisted shadows that stretched out before me like fingers reaching for something just beyond my grasp. I wanted to turn back, to go inside and lock the door, to convince myself that I was being foolish. But my feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the door, toward the light. The lighthouse keeper's warning flashed in my mind again, do not stay out after dark. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. There was something in the air, something in the space between the fog and the light that called to me. When I reached the door, it swung open as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside without thinking, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside was colder than it should have been, and the walls seemed to groan under some unseen pressure, as if they were alive, breathing. I stood in the entrance for a moment, my mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. The lighthouse keeper's voice echoed in my head, telling me to leave, to go back to the house, to get away. But my body wasn't listening. My mind wasn't listening. There was something more powerful than fear pulling me deeper into the darkness of the lighthouse. I made my way up the winding staircase, my footsteps slow and deliberate. The hum was louder now, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my bones. Each step seemed to take me further from reality, further from the person I had been before I arrived on this island. I felt different, detached, as though my very being was fading, becoming a part of the lighthouse itself. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, the walls growing narrower as I ascended. My vision began to blur, the shadows in the corners of my eyes growing more defined, more real. I thought I saw movement, figures standing just beyond my reach, their faces indistinct, their shapes shifting like smoke. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my thoughts, but it was as if the fog was inside me now, clouding my mind, twisting my perceptions. I was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. The boundary between imagination and reality had dissolved, leaving me adrift in a world that seemed to change with every breath I took. I reached the top of the lighthouse, stepping into the tower where the light rotated, casting long beams of white across the ocean below. But the view was distorted, warped, as though seen through a haze. The sea, once a violent, churning mass, was now calm, too calm. The waves barely moved, and the sky above was an unnatural shade of gray, devoid of stars. There was no horizon, no separation between sea and sky, only a void that stretched endlessly into nothingness. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't just the light that was flickering, it was me. My thoughts, my mind, were slipping. And then, as I stared into the void, I saw something in the distance. A figure. No, not a figure, someone. It was the same face I had seen in the fog. The pale, gaunt face, staring at me with hollow eyes, like a man lost at sea. My breath caught in my throat, and I reached for the railing, my hand shaking. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it was. I was no longer sure if I was awake. The air in the lighthouse tower was thick, almost suffocating. The hum had settled into a deep, vibrating pulse that seemed to rattle my bones, vibrating through the walls and floor beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and confusion. Everything I had believed about this place, the warnings, the strange sounds, the apparitions, had been dismissed as overactive imagination. But now, standing here in the tower, I was no longer sure of anything. Reality had begun to unravel, and I was caught in its spiraling descent. I stared out at the mist-covered sea, the fog swirling in eerie patterns around the lighthouse. The world beyond the beam of light seemed to shift and blur like an incomplete puzzle, and I felt a deep unease creep over me. Something was wrong. I wasn't alone. I tried to push the feeling down, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but I could feel it. Something was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw a shadow flicker across the far wall of the tower. My breath hitched in my throat, and I turned to face it, but there was nothing there. Just the same flickering light, casting its pale glow across the empty walls. But the sensation lingered. A coldness that made my skin prickle, an oppressive weight pressing in from all sides. I was not alone. I reached for the railing, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The light swept over the ground below, illuminating the rocky shore, the dark ocean beyond. But then the light caught something else, something just outside its reach. A figure. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was standing at the far end of the tower, near the spiral staircase, barely visible in the shadows. It was a man, an old man, with a face that was pale and gaunt, his features worn with age. His clothes were tattered, as though they had been soaked in salt water for years. His eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to stare right through me, as if he could see things I couldn't. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching me with a gaze that was both distant and knowing. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it, if my mind was playing tricks on me again. But the longer I looked, the more real the figure became. His presence filled the room with an icy chill that made the air seem thicker, harder to breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to escape, but my body wouldn't move. It was as though the figure was drawing me in, keeping me rooted in place with his eyes, with the force of his presence. And then, the voice came. It was soft at first, a low whisper carried by the wind. I could barely hear it over the hum of the lighthouse's light, but the words were unmistakable. Leave this place, before it's too late. The voice was raspy, as if it had been drowned in seawater for years, its edges worn and broken. It came from the figure, the old man standing at the far end of the tower. His mouth didn't move, yet the words seemed to come from him, reverberating in my head, echoing through the foggy silence of the tower. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask who he was, what he wanted, but no sound came. The words seemed to get caught in my throat, lost in the oppressive silence of the tower. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and I took a step forward, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. Leave, or join us. The words sent a shock of cold through my chest, and for the briefest moment, I thought I could hear the faintest sound of waves crashing against the shore, distant yet close, like the murmur of a storm. The figure's hollow eyes bored into me, and I felt a chill so deep that it sank straight to my bones. I wanted to ask more. I needed to know more. But before I could speak, the figure started to fade, his edges blurring into the mist, his form dissolving like smoke on the wind. I blinked, unable to comprehend what was happening. One moment, he was there, standing in front of me, and the next, he was gone, vanished without a trace. I stepped forward, my heart racing, my mind spinning. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. But as I reached the spot where the figure had stood, I felt nothing. No coldness, no presence, no trace of the apparition. The air felt empty, like a vacuum had sucked all the life from the space. I stood there for a long moment, my mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. I glanced around the room, but there was no sign of the old man. The lighthouse tower was empty, silent, save for the constant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor beneath my feet. The words echoed in my mind, "Leave this place, before it's too late." But how? How could I leave? The lighthouse had become a part of me, its weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. And yet, I could feel it, the pull of something ancient and unrelenting. I had been warned, but now I was too far gone. And the figure, the ghost, the sailor, wasn't the only one waiting. There were others. Watching. Waiting for me to make a choice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something much darker than I could understand. The boundary between reality and nightmare had blurred, and I was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. The tension in the air was suffocating. My mind raced with the words of the old man, or whatever he had been. Leave this place, before it's too late. I had ignored the warning, thinking I was just being paranoid, but now, standing in the cold, empty tower, it felt all too real. The hum of the lighthouse, the flickering light, the oppressive fog, all of it had become something more sinister than I had ever imagined. I backed away from the spot where the figure had vanished, my heart pounding as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. Was I going mad? Was this some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from? The sensation of being trapped here, on this cursed island, began to creep over me, clawing at my insides. I had to leave. I had to get away from this place before whatever had claimed the lighthouse claimed me as well. I rushed down the spiral staircase, my steps hurried and frantic. The air was thick with fog, every corner of the lighthouse growing darker, more oppressive. As I reached the bottom, I made my way toward the door, my hands shaking as I tried to turn the handle. But it wouldn't budge. I pulled again, harder this time, panic rising in my chest, but the door refused to open. It was as if something, or someone, was holding it shut, preventing me from leaving. I stepped back, staring at the door, confusion and fear flooding my mind. What was going on? The door had opened when I entered, so why wouldn't it open now? My breath came in short, frantic bursts as I turned, looking for another exit. There had to be another way out, but the walls were closing in around me, the shadows lengthening, swallowing up the space. The lighthouse felt different now. It was no longer the place I had explored earlier that day. The atmosphere had shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, as if alive, the hum vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The faint whispers that had haunted me in the past few days grew louder now, swirling around me like a storm. I could hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Only the cold, empty space of the lighthouse. My mind began to race. I had to find a way out. I had to escape before it was too late. I reached for the nearest window, desperate to see if there was a way out, but the glass was fogged up, thick with condensation, obscuring my view. The light from the lighthouse beam swept across the island, but it no longer illuminated anything clearly. The landscape was distorted, like a half-remembered dream, with the rocks and trees warping in unnatural shapes. I grabbed at the window, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't move. I pounded my fists against the glass, hoping for a crack, anything to get me out. But the more I fought, the more the island seemed to close in around me. The world outside felt like a distant memory, as though the island itself had become unrecognizable, foreign. I couldn't see the cliffs, the ocean, the shore. Only fog and shadows. I ran through the lighthouse, searching for another exit, another way to escape. But the hallways seemed longer now, stretching endlessly, looping in on themselves like a maze. The rooms I passed felt wrong, empty but not quite empty. They were filled with something else, a presence I couldn't quite place, something watching me from the corners of my vision. I could hear breathing in the walls, the low sound of something stirring just out of reach. I stumbled into a room I hadn't seen before. It was small and cramped, filled with dusty old furniture and forgotten belongings. The air in here was thick, heavy with the smell of decay. The walls were covered in mildew, the floorboards creaking under my weight. But there, in the center of the room, was something I hadn't noticed before, a mirror. It was old, tarnished with age, the frame carved with intricate designs I couldn't quite make out. I stepped closer, drawn to it despite the unease creeping up my spine. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine. At least, it wasn't how I looked now. The figure staring back at me was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes, just like the man I had seen in the tower. The reflection seemed to smile, a twisted, knowing grin that sent a chill down my spine. I backed away from the mirror, my heart racing, but the reflection remained, staring at me with an eerie calm. I had to get out. I had to leave this place, but the island, the lighthouse, it was changing. It was as if the very ground beneath my feet was alive, shifting, trapping me in a world I no longer understood. I ran again, desperate, my feet stumbling on the uneven floor, my breath ragged as I fought to keep my panic at bay. The fog outside had thickened, and the wind had picked up, howling through the cracks in the walls. I could hear the waves crashing against the cliffs, but it felt distant, as though the sea itself had receded. The sound seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, as though the entire island was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, I heard it. A voice, soft at first, but growing louder. It was the voice of the old man, calling from somewhere deep within the lighthouse. "Stay with us," it whispered, the words filled with a slow, creeping malice. "Stay, and join us." I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the walls, closing in tighter, the shadows growing longer. The island was no longer the place I had arrived at. The lighthouse was no longer just a building, it was a trap, and I was its prey. I pressed my back against the wall, breathing heavily, my thoughts racing. There had to be a way out. But no matter which direction I turned, the way out seemed to be blocked. The island was shifting, turning against me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the hum growing louder, more insistent, like the heartbeat of the island itself. I tried the door again, but it wouldn't open. I ran back to the stairs, but they seemed to lead nowhere. The fog outside thickened, turning into a wall of white that swallowed the lighthouse whole. I had made a fatal mistake. And now, it was too late. I had run through every corner of the lighthouse. I had tried every door, every window, even the walls themselves. Nothing would open. The island, once a place of quiet isolation, had turned into a twisted labyrinth. The fog had thickened, and the air felt denser, like I was suffocating in its weight. The very land beneath my feet seemed to shift, turning against me, locking me in. The lighthouse, once an intriguing relic of isolation, now loomed over me like a prison. Its towering, jagged structure felt even more menacing in the dark. The beam of light from the top, once a reassuring guide, now seemed like a harbinger of doom, sweeping over the shore like I was watching my every move. The shadows grew longer, creeping into the corners of the rooms, curling around the furniture like dark fingers, reaching for me. I leaned against the cold, damp walls, trying to steady my breath, but it was hard to think clearly. Panic and fear clouded my thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate. I had tried to convince myself this was just some nightmare, that I would wake up any moment. But the chill in the air, the eerie hum vibrating through the floors, told me otherwise. I was still here. I was still trapped. The door I had once tried to open now seemed like a cruel joke. No matter how hard I pushed, no matter how many times I turned the handle, it refused to budge. It wasn't locked. It was as if the island itself was refusing to let me go, as if it were holding me captive in its suffocating grip. I stumbled back from the door, running my hands through my hair in frustration. There had to be a way out. There had to be. My thoughts were frantic, my pulse racing. The lighthouse had always felt like a distant curiosity, a quiet place to reflect. But now, it was a nightmare. I was being watched. I could feel it, the pressure of unseen eyes weighing heavily on me. I could almost hear the whispers, barely audible, but growing louder as if they were closing in. I moved quickly through the halls, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. The lighthouse seemed to grow even darker, the shadows shifting unnaturally as I passed. The very air felt alive, thick with a presence I couldn't escape. My chest tightened, and the more I ran, the more the walls seemed to close in around me, as though the structure itself were alive, shifting to trap me. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy, suddenly filled the air behind me. I froze. I didn't have to look. I could feel the presence behind me, like a shadow stretching across the floor. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever, or whatever, was behind me was getting closer. I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't. But my instinct screamed at me to move, to keep running, to escape. Yet no matter where I went, no matter how fast I tried to move, the lighthouse seemed to stretch out in all directions, offering no escape, no exit. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, more distinct, and suddenly I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. My body tensed in fear, my heart hammering in my chest as I spun around, expecting to face whatever was following me. But there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. The silence that followed was deafening, oppressive. I could hear the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I stood frozen, unsure whether I had imagined it or if something was truly stalking me through the lighthouse. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something. A flicker of movement, a figure in the shadows. My breath hitched in my chest as I turned toward it, my pulse quickening with dread. The figure was tall, thin, and moving with a strange, jerky motion as if it were gliding rather than walking. It was just at the edge of the light, its features obscured by the darkness. But I could feel its presence, its coldness creeping into the air around me. The room felt colder, the temperature dropping with every step it took toward me. I took a hesitant step backward, my back against the cold stone wall, my breath shallow and ragged. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lighthouse beam in a sickly, unnatural hue. I couldn't see its face clearly, but the chill in the air made it clear it wasn't human. It took another step forward. The sound of its movement, like dry leaves scraping across the floor, echoed in the silence. My mind raced. I had to get out. I had to leave. But the exit seemed farther away with every step I took. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of me, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. There were no exits, no windows, no way to escape. The island was closing in, and I was trapped, caught in a never-ending maze of corridors and rooms. I ran, but the shadows seemed to follow me, moving with unnatural speed. I could hear the figure behind me now, its steps growing faster, relentless. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. The only thing I could do was run, hoping that somehow, someway, there would be an escape. But I knew, deep down, that the lighthouse wouldn't let me go. The island was holding me. I was trapped. And someone, was waiting for me in the dark. My breath came in shallow gasps, each inhale tinged with panic. I had been running through the lighthouse, my heart hammering in my chest, only to find myself in yet another dead end. The hallways twisted endlessly, every turn leading to another closed door, another shadowed room. The walls seemed to press in around me, suffocating, as if the very lighthouse had become alive and was slowly, steadily, tightening its grip. But then, something changed. The oppressive quiet that had filled the lighthouse for what felt like hours was suddenly broken by a soft whisper. It wasn't the wind, it was a voice. A voice that carried with it an unmistakable, ancient sorrow. "Leave this place, now!" I froze, my blood running cold. It wasn't just the wind, and it wasn't my imagination. This was a voice, a warning. And it wasn't the first time I had heard it. The words echoed in my mind, words I had first heard when I arrived at the lighthouse, whispers that had followed me, haunting me from the very moment I stepped onto the island. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the room behind me. The shadows seemed to shift, their movements fluid and unnerving. And then, there, standing in the far corner, barely visible in the dark, was a figure. Tall, thin, and translucent, its form was wavering, flickering like a candle in the wind. It was one of them, the ghosts I had encountered earlier. I stepped back, my skin crawling with dread. The figure's eyes gleamed faintly, as if it were staring directly at me, and I felt a coldness settle in my bones, a sensation of being watched by something far older and more powerful than I could comprehend. But it wasn't the figure that held my attention now, it was the words, the warning. They were trying to tell me something. "Do you see?" the figure whispered, its voice faint but unmistakable. "This is not your place. The light, it holds them." The words hung in the air, their meaning slipping just out of my reach. I had heard this before, but I hadn't understood. I thought the ghosts were simply tormented souls, lingering here for reasons unknown, trying to claim the living. But now, standing in front of me, I realized the truth. The ghosts weren't trying to capture me. They were trying to save me. The light, was what held them here. The lighthouse beam that once seemed like a beacon of safety was the source of their suffering. The spirits that haunted this place were not merely the victims of some ancient curse. They were the prisoners of the lighthouse, tethered to it by the same force that kept me on this island, that kept me trapped. I could feel it now, the pull of the light, drawing me in, weaving its cold fingers through my thoughts, my very soul. The walls of the lighthouse were alive, not with malice, but with an ancient power, a force far older than I had realized. It had lured me here, just as it had lured them, the spirits that now circled the lighthouse like caged animals, desperate for release. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, and I instinctively backed away. It reached out with a long, bony hand, its fingers like tendrils of mist, almost touching me. "Leave," it whispered again, and this time there was no mistaking the urgency in its voice. Before it's too late. Before it claims you, too. A chill swept over me, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. Leave? How could I leave? The island was a maze, the paths twisted and unfamiliar, and the lighthouse itself seemed to shift, closing off any escape at every turn. The door wouldn't open. The windows were locked. The very land itself felt like a trap. But then the realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't just running from the lighthouse. I was running from something much worse. The ghosts were warning me about some simple, supernatural force. They were warning me about the lighthouse. They were warning me about the beacon. The light itself. The very thing that seemed to guide ships safely to shore was the thing that kept us all, living and dead, bound to the island. It wasn't a lifeline, it was a prison. And I was trapped inside it. I turned and ran again, but my steps felt heavier now, as if the weight of the lighthouse itself were pushing me down. The hum of the lighthouse had changed, no longer a simple vibration, but something deeper, more insistent. I could feel it in my chest, like a heartbeat thumping against my ribs. The light above flickered ominously, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms. And that's when I saw them again, the other spirits. They were everywhere now, lingering at the edge of my vision, their faces pale and twisted with despair. They were silent, but their presence was suffocating. The shadows around them seemed to warp, bending and stretching unnaturally. They didn't want me to join them, not in the way I had thought. They wanted me to escape, to leave before I became like them, trapped in this place forever. "Do you see now?" the ghost whispered, its form flickering like candlelight. "You must leave, or you will stay." But how? How could I leave when the island itself was a prison? The lighthouse's beam pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, and I felt my body drawn toward it, as if it had a magnetic pull, sucking me toward its core. I had to get away. I had to escape, before the light claimed me, before it took everything I had left. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the sound of the wind outside grew louder, almost deafening. But it wasn't the wind, it was the sound of the lighthouse itself, the power it was drawing from the sea, from the island. It was feeding on the souls of the lost. And it was hungry. I had to move. There was no time left. I had been running for what felt like hours, though time seemed to bend and twist in the unnatural gloom of the lighthouse. Each corner I turned, each door I tried, led only to more darkness, more cold stone. The air was thick, heavy, like the very walls were pressing in on me, intent on keeping me trapped. I could still feel the pull of the light, its relentless tug on my mind, forcing me toward its endless beam. But I couldn't look at it, not yet. I had to understand what was happening, what had happened to the others, to the ghosts who were trying to warn me. And then it happened. As I stumbled into yet another hallway, the air seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and for the briefest moment, the flickering shadows around me solidified into something real. It wasn't just a trick of the mind or the darkness. The shadows had formed now, a shape, human, but not quite. I turned, heart racing, eyes wide, and saw them. They appeared in the hallway, their figures ghostly, ethereal, like a twisted reflection in a cracked mirror. Sailors, dressed in ragged uniforms, their faces pale and contorted with agony. Their bodies seemed to shimmer, the faint outlines of their forms flickering in and out of view. The stench of salt water and decay hung heavily in the air, mixing with the foul, stagnant smell of death that clung to them. They did not speak, but their eyes, Those eyes locked onto mine with a depth of despair that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat as I saw them for what they were, not just the remnants of the dead, but trapped souls, lost and bound to the lighthouse, unable to escape. Their faces were twisted in pain, each one an image of torment, as if they were caught between life and death, between the world of the living and the unearthly prison of the island. One of them, taller than the others, with dark, sunken eyes, reached out a hand toward me, the movement slow and deliberate, as if it had taken centuries for it to even muster the strength to reach out. I could see the desperation in his eyes. They were not here to harm me. They were trying to warn me, just as the figure had whispered before. They wanted me to know what they had learned too late, that the lighthouse wasn't a sanctuary, but a trap. A cold chill ran through me as their tortured faces seemed to distort even further. The sailor's hand stopped just inches from my own, his fingers trembling as though the very air around him was crushing him. His voice, when it came, was a rasp, strained and full of regret. "Leave," he whispered, his words barely audible, lost in the groan of the walls. "It will take you too." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His words, so simple, so soft, seemed to echo within me, resonating in my very soul. The air around me pulsed with the heaviness of their suffering, and the shadows deepened, shifting, writhing like living creatures. The sailors, their bodies flickering in and out of existence, circled around me in a slow, agonizing dance. Their eyes never left me. Their faces never stopped contorting with the agony of their eternal prison. Another sailor, his chest hollow and his uniform tattered beyond recognition, stepped closer. His movements were jerky, as though every step caused him pain. But his gaze, his empty, hollow gaze, was locked onto me with an intensity that made me want to scream. "We tried to escape," he croaked, his voice hollow and distant. "But it holds us. We are trapped." Their voices layered over one another now, a cacophony of whispered warnings, all urging me to run, to leave before I too was caught in the same fate. The desperation in their eyes was overwhelming. They had once been men, living men, but now they were little more than shadows, their souls entwined with the very walls of the lighthouse. The light had consumed them, bound them here for eternity. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the cold grip of fear that had sunk into my bones. My mind raced, trying to find some explanation, some way to make sense of this nightmare. But the truth was undeniable. The lighthouse was alive, and it fed on the souls of those who came near it. The ghosts that lingered in the shadows, the sailors that now circled me, were proof of that. They had once been like me, visitors, unaware of the horrors they would face. But now they were part of the lighthouse. They were its prisoners. Their faces twisted again, contorted in pain, and I heard another voice join the chorus. A sailor with a face so pale it looked like it had been drained of life, his mouth wide open in a silent scream. "Don't stay." The voice was guttural, strained. It will claim you, too." The shadows around me grew darker, the figures of the sailors flickering more violently now, as if the lighthouse was reacting to their agony. The light above, the light, flashed brighter for a split second, casting everything in stark white, blinding light. I could feel it searing my skin, burning into my very soul. And then, as quickly as it had started, the light flickered out. The figures were gone, vanishing into the air like smoke. The hall fell silent. Too silent. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs trembling. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The sailors, their faces, their warnings, they were gone, but their presence lingered, filling the air with their unspoken pain. The lighthouse was still there, the beam sweeping through the night, and I knew that I was now caught in its web, just as they had been. The darkness pressed in on me, but I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let it claim me, too. I had to escape. But how? There was no way out. The island itself was closing in. The lighthouse was pulling me toward it, and I could feel the cold grip of the sailor's fate tightening around me. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was one of them. I stood in the darkness, the chill of the lighthouse pressing on me like a heavy fog. The sailors had vanished, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Their faces, those twisted, desperate expressions, remained etched in my mind, the images burning into my thoughts. They were gone, but I could still feel their presence, their pain, their endless suffering. It was as if the air around me had thickened with their sorrow. My heart pounded in my chest, the sound of it deafening in the stillness. I knew what I had to do. I had to understand. I had to reach out to them. They had been trying to warn me, trying to help me. But how? How could I communicate with the dead? With the trapped souls who had been bound to this lighthouse for who knows how long? The walls of the lighthouse seemed to pulse, its heartbeat matching mine. The light above flickered again, casting shadows that seemed to move with purpose, as if they had a mind of their own. I could feel the pull of the beam again, stronger now, its cold tendrils sinking into my thoughts, urging me toward the center of the lighthouse. I didn't want to go back to that beam, not yet. But I had no choice. The answers I sought were there, within those walls, within the light. I took a shaky step forward, then another. My legs felt heavy, unwilling to move, as if the very ground beneath me was resisting my every motion. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. The sailors, no, the ghosts, had been trapped here. I was trapped here. We were all bound to this place, and I couldn't leave without understanding how to escape, how to break free from the curse that held us all captive. I reached the center of the room, my eyes drawn to the light. It seemed to hum, alive with an energy that vibrated through my bones. The air was thick with static, and the temperature had dropped further, my breath now visible in the freezing air. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't let the fear overtake me. I needed answers. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they grazed the cold stone wall. The air around me seemed to shift, growing heavier. And then, the voices came again, soft at first, a whisper, barely audible. "Help us." I flinched, pulling my hand back, but then I realized that the voice wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from all around me, from within me. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, pressing against my ribs as though the very air was alive with the ghosts' voices, their pleas, their warnings. I stood still, my heart racing, and the voices grew louder. "We were once like you," one voice rasped, faint and distant, its words distorted, stretched by the cold grip of time. "We thought we could escape, but the light, it took us." Another voice, younger, weaker, followed the first. It won't let you leave. It feeds on you, on your soul. Once you are here, there is no going back." I closed my eyes, my breath quickening. The words burned through me, and yet I couldn't look away from the darkness that surrounded me. I felt my mind slipping, losing its hold on reality as the voices grew louder, their cries mixing together in a cacophony of desperation. I was surrounded by them, by their agony, by their endless wandering. "But we can still hear you," the first voice whispered again, a sliver of hope flickering in the words. We were trapped here, bound by the light. It is the light, it keeps us. But we once tried to break free, just as you will try now. I swallowed, trying to steady myself. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as the voices filled my ears. The weight of their words was suffocating. The ghosts, they hadn't wanted to be here. They had tried, just as I was trying now, to escape. But there was no escape. No way out. The light held them in its grasp, as it held me now. One of the figures, the tall one, the sailor whose face I could never forget, appeared before me again, his features twisted in pain. He moved slowly, deliberately, his form flickering with each step as if it were struggling to remain solid. We are not like we were, he muttered, his voice barely audible above the others. The light changes you, twists you, into something else. Something that is neither alive nor dead. We thought we could fight it, but we were wrong. It consumes you. The air around me seemed to grow even colder, and I could feel the ice creeping into my veins. The light above pulsed again, more violently this time, the hum growing louder. The shadows in the room shifted, stretching, pulling toward the light. And for a moment, I could see what they meant. The sailors, once alive, once men, were not just dead. They had become part of the lighthouse. They were now a reflection of its curse, a part of the dark force that kept them bound to this island forever. You must not stay, the sailor said again, his voice breaking through the noise. Leave, before it takes you, before it takes all of you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the weight of their words held me in place. The light. The cursed light. It wasn't just a beacon, it was a prison. It was the force that kept them here, kept all of us here. I reached out once more, my trembling fingers brushing against the cold stone. The ghosts' voices echoed in my ears, their pleas growing more desperate. We were once like you. I realized then, with a jolt of terror, that I was already a part of this. The lighthouse had claimed me, just as it had claimed them. It wasn't just a place of torment for the dead. It was a place of transformation, a place where souls were twisted and bound to the light for eternity. I wasn't just trapped on this island. I was becoming like them. The voices grew louder, and the cold in the air seemed to intensify, freezing me in place. I could feel the weight of their words pressing down on me, the warnings echoing through my mind like a constant, thudding drumbeat. There was no more doubt. The lighthouse wasn't just a prison, it was a force, an all-consuming presence that would never let go. I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of the darkness now. My heart raced as the air thickened, the shadows growing longer and deeper, stretching toward me with a hunger I could feel in my very bones. The light flickered again, this time casting sharp, jagged shadows across the walls. It was as though the lighthouse was alive, aware of my presence, watching me. I could feel its hunger, its desire to claim me, to pull me into the abyss that had swallowed the others. And then they returned. The sailors. The ghosts. Their faces, twisted in pain, emerged from the dark, their figures flickering like weak flames in a storm. They surrounded me, their hollow eyes locked onto mine, their bodies moving with unnatural speed. Their hands, long and claw-like, reached for me, their fingers trembling with desperation. I could hear their voices again, louder now, more frantic. You cannot leave, one of them cried, his voice an agonized wail. You belong here now. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. There was no escape. The walls were closing in, and I could feel the light, its blinding intensity, pushing me toward the center, toward its grasping pull. I turned to run, but the ghosts were faster. Their hands grasped my arms, pulling me toward them with unnatural strength. The cold, clammy touch of their fingers burned through my skin, as though they were not just touching me, but leaching the warmth from my body. No! I screamed, fighting against them. My hands clawed at the air, at the stone walls, but there was nothing to hold on to. I could feel the cold of their hands seeping into my bones, draining me, consuming me. Their faces twisted in silent agony, their eyes pleading, urging me to join them in their torment. I kicked and struggled, my body moving on instinct, but their grip tightened, their fingers digging into my skin. The air around me grew heavier, colder, as though the very space itself was pressing in on me. I could feel the light, pulling at my soul, tugging me toward its blinding, eternal glow. Please, no! I gasped, the desperation in my voice unmistakable. I don't want to be like you. But the ghosts didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke louder than any words could. They had once been like me, alive, full of hope, full of defiance, but now they were nothing more than hollow shells, trapped forever by the light. Their twisted forms, their outstretched hands, they were a warning. A warning of what I would become if I failed. I knew, deep in my gut, that the light would consume me. It wasn't just a beacon. It wasn't just a guiding light. It was a trap, a force that would twist me, break me, and leave me wandering the island for eternity, just like them. I had a choice to make. I could fight, but how? The more I struggled, the more the ghosts pulled at me, dragging me closer to the center of the lighthouse. Their cries echoed in my ears, a chorus of suffering and sorrow. I could feel my strength draining, my willpower fading with every breath. The lighthouse was draining me, just as it had drained them. Or I could surrender. Let them take me. Let the light claim me and pull me into its unyielding embrace, where I would join the others, become part of the endless cycle of torment. I would become one of the shadows, one of the spirits, forever bound to the lighthouse, to the island. But there was something inside me, a flicker of resistance, however small, telling me I couldn't give in. I had to fight. I had to survive. I wasn't like them. I wasn't dead yet. The ghosts, the sailors, they had given up. But I hadn't. Not yet. I let out a desperate cry, summoning every ounce of strength left in me, and slammed my hands against the cold stone walls of the lighthouse. The darkness seemed to pulse around me, the ghosts tightening their grip, but something inside me snapped. The light, the power of the lighthouse, it wasn't everything. There was still a part of me that was human, still a spark of life that couldn't be extinguished so easily. With a final, desperate shove, I broke free from their grasp. I staggered back, breathing heavily, my legs buckling beneath me. The ghosts howled in fury, their mournful cries filling the air as I scrambled toward the door. The light above flickered, brighter now, as if angry at my defiance, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I was running from them, from the lighthouse, from the light that wanted to swallow me whole. The shadows reached for me, their cold fingers brushing my back, but I kept moving, faster now, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know if there was a way out, but I had to try. The ghosts' voices faded, their hands no longer gripping me, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I was free. But the island was still there. The lighthouse was still there. And I could still feel its pull, still feel the weight of the curse pressing down on me, urging me back. The question echoed in my mind as I fled into the darkness. Could I really escape? Or was I just running toward the inevitable? I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, oppressive. Each inhalation felt like a struggle, like the very atmosphere was squeezing the life from me. I was running, but the island felt endless, its twisted, shadowed landscape stretching out before me in every direction. I had no idea where I was going, no clear path to follow, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let the lighthouse pull me back. But no matter how fast I ran, it felt like the island was closing in around me. The sounds, the voices, they were everywhere. Whispers fluttered at the edges of my hearing, like the wind, but there was no wind, just the sound of something breathing. Something following me. I stumbled, my foot catching on something hidden beneath the underbrush. My body hit the cold ground with a thud, the impact jarring every bone in my body. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my hands pressed into the dirt. The night was too still, too silent. I pushed myself up, my head spinning. My legs trembled as I stood, and my mind was racing, flooded with confusion, with doubt. Was it all real? Was this happening? Or was I just losing my mind? I reached out, my hand shaking as it brushed against the rough bark of a nearby tree. I tried to steady myself, but my thoughts were a tangled mess, slipping through my grasp like sand through my fingers. The lighthouse, the spirits, they were so vivid, so real. But how could that be possible? Could my mind have twisted everything? Had the fear taken such a hold on me that I was seeing things that weren't there? I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut as if to shut out the world around me. But the images, the sounds, they lingered, haunting whispers, distant footsteps, the flicker of faces in the corners of my vision. My hands were clammy, my heart thudding against my chest like a drum, but there was no escaping it. I was losing myself. A flash of movement caught my eye, quick, fleeting, like a shadow darting between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone at all. I spun around, searching, but there was nothing. Just the still, oppressive night. My heartbeat was deafening in my ears, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or if something, or someone, was really there. My thoughts spiraled further as the darkness around me seemed to close in. Was I losing my mind? The lighthouse. The ghosts. Had they gotten to me? I had fought so hard, but now, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I turned back toward the lighthouse, still visible in the distance, its light a cruel beacon that seemed to beckon me. It was as if the island itself was alive, a part of something bigger, something ancient and hungry. I wanted to run, I needed to run. But my legs felt heavy, and the fear gnawed at me like a slow burn. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping around me, but I could feel no breeze. Only the sensation of being watched, of being pursued. I swallowed, trying to force the fear back, but it clung to me like a second skin. My mind was breaking under the strain. I could feel myself unraveling, my grip on reality slipping more with each passing second. The world around me twisted. Was it the darkness closing in, or was it just my vision warping? I couldn't tell. Everything looked different. The trees seemed to sway, bending in ways they shouldn't, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Was I hallucinating? Or was this really happening? The world was pulling away from me, like a dream I couldn't wake from. I could hear them again, the voices. Louder now, not just whispers, but full sentences, sharp, grating. We never escaped. You cannot leave. They were all around me, the words pushing into my skull, their cold fingers wrapping around my mind. I clenched my teeth, my head pounding with the force of it. I couldn't hear anything else. No wind. No birds. No sea. Just a relentless barrage of voices, the pressure building inside me, threatening to split me open. I stumbled forward, my hands gripping the ground beneath me as if it could anchor me, as if it could stop me from falling further into the madness. The shadows were moving again, twisting in impossible ways. Was it the lighthouse light? Or was it the spirits? Was it them, or was it me? You will stay. The voice seemed to come from the ground itself, or from within my own mind. You belong here now. I shook my head, fighting the words, fighting the pressure. I was here. I had been pulled back. But I was still alive. I was still real. But how could I be sure? I staggered toward the lighthouse, the darkness pressing in on me, every step feeling like it was dragging me into the earth. The shadows that danced around me grew thicker, closer. The whispers turned into screams, their words frantic, desperate. Help us. Help me. I covered my ears, but they still echoed inside my skull. I couldn't make sense of it anymore. I couldn't tell where the hallucinations ended and reality began. Was it the lighthouse? Was it my own mind twisting under the pressure? Was this the real world, or had I already crossed over into the place between? The ground beneath me shuddered, and I froze. Something was moving beneath my feet. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it, a presence, waiting, shifting under the surface. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was stand there, shaking, caught in the suffocating grip of fear and doubt. Am I still alive? I thought. But deep down, I already knew the answer. The wind howled, its voice like a wild animal in the night, but I couldn't tell if it was the storm or the spiraling chaos in my mind that made the sound so deafening. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stumbled through the darkness, each step taking me further into the island's grip. The light of the lighthouse flickered distantly, but even that flicker felt like a cruel mockery, promising safety and escape, but knowing I would never reach it. I could still hear the voice. The lighthouse keeper's words, always so cold, so matter of fact. Don't stay after dark. Don't listen to the wind. It's them, the ones who stayed too long. They're still here, and they'll want you to stay with them. Forever. Was he warning me? Or was he already a part of it? The memories twisted together, melding into something unrecognizable. Had he known? Had he always known? I could almost hear his voice now, ringing in my ears as if he were standing right next to me, his breath hot against my skin. But was it him, or was it just the ghosts? The shadows stretched across the landscape, distorting every tree, every rock into something unfamiliar. I was losing myself. My hands trembled, and I wiped them on my pants, but it didn't help. My skin felt clammy, cold, and my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the whispers anymore. Or was it the other way around? Was it that the whispers were getting louder, pressing into my ears like fingers digging into my skull? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to clear my mind. I needed to focus. I had to escape. But every time I thought I was getting away, I would turn a corner or stumble through the brush, and the lighthouse would be there again. The light was always watching, like a glaring eye that would never blink. It felt alive. Hunger, I thought. The lighthouse had hunger, and it had found me. Don't stay, the keeper's voice, distorted by time and panic, echoed again in my mind. I could see his face, pale, his eyes wide with fear as he spoke of those who had gone before me, the ones who had ignored the warnings, who had stayed after dark. Were they real? Were the ghosts real? I remembered the first night, when I had laughed at the old man's warnings, dismissing them as superstition. I'd convinced myself that it was just the isolation getting to him, that the loneliness had warped his mind, turning him into a creature of myth. A man who had lived too long with the sea and its mysteries, crafting stories to explain the unexplainable. But now, as the wind cut through the trees and the shadows pressed in on me, I wasn't so sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The whispering began again, faint at first, but growing louder as I stood there, frozen. "You can't leave." It was softer now, a voice I had heard before. It was familiar, and I realized with a start that it was mine. I staggered backward, a sense of panic surging through me. The ghosts, they were real, weren't they? The faces I had seen, the sailors with their hollow eyes, their outstretched hands, they were not just figments of my imagination, not just nightmares born from fear. They had been real. They had been trapped here, just like me, because of the lighthouse. But could I trust my mind now? Was this really happening, or was I simply unraveling under the pressure? Had the fear twisted everything so much that I could no longer distinguish between hallucination and reality? I could feel my thoughts splintering, my mind a fractured mirror, each piece reflecting something different. The lighthouse keeper's warnings, his dark eyes as he spoke of the spirits, of those who had stayed too long, of those who had become a part of the island. I had heard his voice, I had seen his fear, but what if it had been nothing more than a figment of my mind? What if I was the one who was already gone? What if I had already joined them? The wind whistled through the trees, but now it sounded different. It wasn't just wind. It sounded like voices, loud, anguished. The crashing waves against the rocks beneath me seemed to echo with cries, not of the sea, but of people, sailors who had drowned, or worse, sailors who had never left. I shook my head, trying to block it all out. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. I had to get out. I had to stay sane. But every step I took felt heavier. My legs shook with each movement, my mind too clouded with fear to think clearly. I wasn't even sure where I was going anymore. The island had become a labyrinth of shadows, each tree, each rock, each broken path leading me further into the unknown. I tried to recall the keeper's face. Had I misjudged him? Had he been trying to help, or was he part of the curse too? He had known, hadn't he? He had known what would happen, that once the night fell, I would be lost, just as the others before me had been. But had he always been part of the island? Or had it taken him, too, like it had taken the others? The questions piled up in my mind, each one pushing out the others, making it impossible to focus, impossible to think clearly. What if the lighthouse had never let him go? What if the spirits had claimed him just as they would claim me? What if he was just another part of their endless loop? My breath quickened as I turned around again, searching desperately for any sign of escape, any way to break free. The lighthouse was still there, just ahead, its light cutting through the night like a blade. It knows I'm here. It knows that I can't leave. It knows that I belong to it now. Help me, I whispered to the air, to the ghosts, to whatever had been following me. Please, help me. But there was no answer. Only the wind. Only the light. only the endless whispering, growing louder. And I wasn't sure anymore if the voices I heard were from the ghosts or from inside my own head. I don't know how much time had passed. The hours bled together like watercolors in the rain, each moment slipping into the next with no clear boundaries. I was lost. Lost in the dark, the whispers, the oppressive weight of fear pressing down on me like a physical force. The lighthouse, always so far and yet so close, loomed like a distant star, an unblinking eye in the darkness. I had to find answers. I had to know what was happening. And the only person who could possibly give me any clue was the lighthouse keeper. But the thought of him sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't seen him for hours, but his warning, the fear in his eyes when he spoke, still echoed in my mind. I remembered how he had looked at me when I told him I wasn't leaving. He had been so certain, so sure that I was making a terrible mistake. What if he had known something more? What if he had been hiding something? I could feel the pull of the lighthouse, its light beckoning me like a moth to a flame. The voices had quieted now, but they were still there, just beneath the surface. A soft hum in the back of my mind. The wind seemed to carry their weight, like it was alive, breathing with me. My legs were heavy, each step a struggle against the pull of exhaustion, but I pushed on. I had to find him. I had to find the answers before it was too late. The door to the keeper's quarters was cracked open. I hadn't seen it like this before. It felt wrong. It was as if something was waiting for me inside. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, my breath shallow and uneven. I didn't want to open it. Part of me wanted to turn around and run, but I couldn't. I was trapped here, and I knew that whatever secrets the keeper held were the key to escaping this nightmare. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting long shadows across the walls. The smell of salt and something otherworldly filled the air, thick and choking. My eyes scanned the room quickly, darting between the shadows. And there, in the corner, sitting at a wooden desk, was the keeper. He didn't look up as I entered. His back was hunched, his face obscured by the dim light. He was scribbling something in a worn notebook, his hand moving rapidly across the pages. His breathing was shallow, almost erratic. I stood frozen at the door, unsure whether to speak or retreat. His movements were slow, deliberate, too controlled. He seemed unaware of my presence, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I was there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke without turning around. "You shouldn't have come here." The words were calm, but they sent a wave of cold through me. He hadn't even looked at me. It was as if he already knew what I had been through, what I was beginning to realize. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step forward, unable to stop myself. "What is happening here?" I asked, my voice shaky. "What's going on with the lighthouse?" The ghosts, the whispers. The keeper's pen stopped moving. The silence that followed felt like a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I watched as he slowly set the pen down on the desk, his hands trembling slightly. Finally, he turned to face me. His eyes, those deep, unblinking eyes, locked onto mine, and I saw something there. Something dark. Something ancient. "The island," he began, his voice low, "it's not like other places. It takes what it wants. And the lighthouse, it's where the lost souls are bound. They never leave. They wander, calling out to those who are foolish enough to stay. But you don't understand. You don't know what it wants from you." I stepped back, a chill creeping down my spine. His words were unsettling, but they made sense in a way. Everything about this place was wrong. The oppressive air, the light of the lighthouse that never seemed to change, the voices that followed me. But there was something more, something deeper in his words that didn't sit right with me. "What do you mean, what it wants from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The keeper's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, a twisted, knowing grin. "You've already seen them," he said. "The sailors. The ones who couldn't escape. They tried to leave, but the island keeps them. The lighthouse keeps them. And now, it wants you." The air seemed to grow colder as he spoke. The room around me felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing tighter with every word. I could hear the faint sound of whispers, distant and muffled, but they were growing louder. I shook my head, trying to push the terror back down. "No, I'm not like them. I can leave. I will leave." The keeper's expression darkened. "You can't. No one can. Not unless it lets you." I stared at him, my mind racing. I needed to understand. Was he part of this? Had he been here so long that he had become one with the island? Or had he somehow known what was coming for me and had tried to warn me? "Why are you here?" I asked, desperate. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you get away?" He paused, his eyes flicking toward the window, as if seeing something beyond the darkened sky. His gaze seemed distant, like he was looking at something only he could see. "Because," he murmured, almost to himself, "the island doesn't let you go. Once you're here, it owns you. The light, the lighthouse. It keeps you, whether you want it or not." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt my knees weaken, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The keeper wasn't just warning me. He was trying to tell me something much darker, something that only those who had been trapped here for too long could understand. I wasn't going to escape. Not unless the lighthouse allowed it. Before I could say another word, the keeper slowly turned away, returning to his desk. The lantern flickered, casting long, haunting shadows across the room. The whispers grew louder, closer now, and I realized he was not the only one in the room. The ghosts were watching, and they were waiting for me. "You belong to it now," the keeper whispered without looking back. I froze, and the island seemed to close around me, its grip tightening, sealing my fate. The room felt colder now, the air thick with something beyond the usual dampness of the island. The whispers that had been so distant moments ago now felt like they were right at my ear, creeping under my skin, seeping into my mind. My heart hammered as I stood there, unsure of whether the keeper was still present in the room or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, I saw it. A figure, faint at first, just beyond the flickering lantern's light. It moved slowly, a shadow that seemed to bleed from the walls, its form gradually becoming more solid. My breath hitched, and I instinctively took a step back, my body stiff with terror. The keeper had warned me, hadn't he? About the ghosts. The spirits who had been trapped here, bound to the island by some ancient force. But now, seeing one of them up close, feeling its presence, I wasn't sure I could still breathe. The ghost was a sailor, his face pale and gaunt, the kind of face that only the sea could leave behind. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull, and his clothes hung off him like rags. But it was his mouth that caught my attention, the way it moved as if he was speaking, though no words reached me. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. The figure drifted closer, its feet barely touching the ground. I could feel its presence pressing in, filling the room like a suffocating fog. My pulse raced, my body frozen in place, unable to move or look away. The ghost's lips parted, and this time I could hear him clearly. His voice was ragged, distorted, like a whisper from a great distance. "You should not have come." I wanted to run, to flee from this nightmare, but something held me in place. Some invisible force gripped me, kept my feet rooted to the floor. The ghost's eyes never left me. I could see the pain in them, the longing, as if he was desperate for me to understand something crucial about this place, this island. "What are you? Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling with the question that had been plaguing me since I arrived. I needed to know. I had to understand. The ghost's face twisted in agony, and he took a step forward. His form rippled, as if the very fabric of reality around him was bending. For a moment, I thought I saw the flash of a different time, a different place, his ship, the rocky coastline, a storm brewing on the horizon. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. The sailor was back in the present, his hollow eyes fixed on me once again. "We were bound," he said, his voice strained, as if the words were choking him. "Not by time, not by fate, but by a pact." My heart skipped a beat. The words cut through the fog of confusion in my mind, sharp and clear. A pact. That was it. The lighthouse wasn't just some twisted supernatural force. It wasn't an accident of time or space. It was the result of something far darker, something deliberate. A pact. I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, the weight of the realization pressing down on me like 1,000 tons of stone. The ghost nodded slowly, his form flickering like a candle about to burn out. "A long time ago, the keeper made a deal. A dark bargain. A price was paid, and we were the payment." His eyes clouded with sorrow. I could feel the depth of his suffering, the weight of the curse that bound him. The others, the sailors who had been lost to the sea, the ones who had tried to escape, were not trapped by the lighthouse because of some cosmic accident. They had been bound to it, tethered here by the actions of the very man who had warned me to leave. The keeper. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The keeper wasn't just some misguided soul who had lost his mind to isolation. He was the one who had made the curse. He had brought this darkness upon the island, upon the people who had come after him, all for whatever dark purpose the pact served. The ghost continued, his voice growing fainter, his form starting to blur. The keeper, he wanted something. Power. Immortality. And the price was us. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, colder than the night air that swirled around me. The ghost's words, heavy with the burden of years of suffering, began to make sense. The keeper had traded his soul for something greater, something that had not just bound him, but had cursed everyone who set foot on the island. I opened my mouth to ask more, to demand answers. But before I could speak, the ghost let out a low, ragged sigh, and his figure began to flicker once more. His outline blurred into the shadows, the edges of his form stretching and distorting like smoke caught in the wind. "You must leave, before it takes you, too," his voice faded, dissolving into the cold air. And then, as if the very fabric of reality had torn, he was gone. The room was empty again, save for the dim light of the lantern and the echoes of his words still reverberating in my head. A pact. A bargain made in blood. A soul for power, for immortality. And I was caught in the middle. I stumbled backward, my legs weak, my heart racing. The room felt suffocating now, the walls closing in on me, the weight of the truth pressing down like a crushing tide. The ghost had spoken the truth, I was certain of it. The keeper's warning had been more than just fear, it had been a desperate plea. A warning from someone who had known what he had done and who had become a part of it. But now, I couldn't leave. I couldn't escape. The island had me. I had come too far, and it knew me now. It had claimed me as it had claimed the others. The question remained, though, what had happened to the keeper? Had he become one of them? Or had he left, escaping the curse, leaving me and the others behind? A new wave of terror washed over me, and I turned to face the door, feeling the pull of the lighthouse growing stronger. There was no time left. The darkness was closing in, and I had to make my choice. But the answer seemed clear now. I wasn't leaving this island. Not unless it let me. I don't know how long I've been standing here, alone in this cursed place. The hours have blurred into an endless stretch of time, each moment growing heavier, suffocating me. I thought I understood the warning, the pact, the ghosts, the keeper's role, and all this, but now, nothing makes sense. My mind feels like it's unraveling, piece by piece, thread by thread, and I can't tell if I'm still here, in this room, or if I'm somewhere else entirely. The air is thick, suffocating. It feels like the walls themselves are breathing, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. My head aches, my thoughts spinning in chaotic circles, and yet, all I can hear are the voices. They're always there now, just at the edges of my awareness, a low murmur at first, but growing louder with every passing moment. At first, I thought they were just the wind, a trick of the island's eerie atmosphere. But as the voices grew clearer, more insistent, I realized the truth. They weren't the wind. They were calling my name. My legs tremble beneath me, as if the very ground is pulling me down. The weight of the lighthouse presses on me from all sides. I try to turn away, to escape, but the voices follow. Their murmurs grow sharper, more urgent, as if they know my every thought, my every hesitation. Come closer. I shudder at the sound, the whisper brushing against my ear. It's not just one voice anymore. It's a chorus, a cacophony of voices, all overlapping, all pleading. The more I resist, the stronger they become. They want me. They want me to come. And I can't ignore it any longer. You must come, it's the only way out. The words twist around me, their meaning slipping just beyond my grasp. There's a promise hidden in the voices, something that calls to the deepest, most desperate part of me. Something that offers an escape, a way out of the nightmare that I can't seem to leave behind. I take a hesitant step forward, and then another. My body moves without my consent, like a puppet on strings. The floor creaks beneath me, the sound far too loud in the silence of the lighthouse. But it doesn't matter. The voices are all I can hear now, all I can feel. Their call is irresistible. Come, it's waiting for you. The room before me grows darker, the shadows stretching and bending in unnatural ways, warping and twisting around me. The walls seem to pulse with a life of their own, as if the lighthouse itself is alive, drawing me in. It's a maze now, a labyrinth of dark corridors, and I have no choice but to follow. I can feel them, the ones who have called me here. I can feel their presence in the air, thick and oppressive. They are all around me now, whispering their promises. They are close. I reach out, my hand trembling, but as I take another step, a gust of wind slams against me, as if the lighthouse is pushing me away. The door to the next room is barely visible, shrouded in shadows. But the voices, they don't let me stop. They never let me stop. It's here. I close my eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I try to remind myself who I am, who I was before I stepped onto this cursed island. But the voices drown out my thoughts, each one pulling me deeper, further into the dark heart of the lighthouse. There is no escape now. With a force that feels like my own soul is being torn from me, I open the door and step inside. The darkness wraps around me, smothering me, drowning me. And yet, I know I'm not alone. The voices, they are here. I take another step forward. The silence between the whispers is deafening. And then, finally, a figure steps from the shadows. The keeper. His eyes glow with a strange, unnatural light, and his mouth curls into a grin that makes my skin crawl. "Welcome home," he says, his voice like a distant echo, as if it comes from both behind and ahead of me at once. And I know, in that moment, that I've crossed the line. There's no turning back. The lighthouse has claimed me, just as it claimed the others before me. I want to scream. I want to fight. But I can't. The voices are louder now. The walls, the very ground beneath me, are alive, and they are pulling me in. The pact has been made, and I am the latest sacrifice. I can't think straight anymore. The air feels too thick, as if it's solidifying around me, choking the breath from my lungs. Every step I take feels like it's costing me more than the last, the ground beneath me shifting, twisting, as though the very island itself is alive and angry. The lighthouse, this accursed place, has become a prison of shadows, and I am its prisoner. The ghosts are everywhere. I can feel them watching me, their hollow eyes burning into my back as I stumble through the darkened hallways. I can't escape them. They whisper in my ears, their voices slithering like cold fingers across my skin, pulling at the edges of my mind. They're getting stronger, more insistent, their presence suffocating. You cannot resist. The words slip into my mind unbidden, a voice so cold, so final. I turn, searching for the source, but there's nothing. Just shadows, stretching across the walls like a living thing. My pulse quickens, my breath shallow as I press my back against the nearest wall. The walls feel like they're closing in, the space narrowing, squeezing tighter with every passing second. I try to move forward, my legs trembling beneath me. But it's no use. Every step feels like I'm wading through thick mud. My body is heavy, sluggish, as though it's resisting me, fighting to stay rooted in place. I can feel it, the weight of the lighthouse's pull, a magnetic force drawing me deeper into its core, pulling at my very soul. I need to leave. I need to find a way out. But I don't know where to go anymore. Every hallway looks the same, every door leads to the same oppressive darkness, every corner hides another memory of suffering. The lighthouse is alive, its heart beating in time with my own, and I am caught in its rhythm. A cold wind howls through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of salt and decay. I shiver, pulling my coat tighter around me, but it doesn't help. Nothing helps. The cold is inside me now, gnawing at my insides, hollowing me out. The ghosts, they're growing stronger, their whispers louder, their presence more forceful. I try to push the thoughts away, to focus on something, anything else, but it's impossible. I'm losing myself, losing my grip on what's real and what's not. The ghosts' whispers have become voices, real voices, calling my name, pulling me toward the center of the lighthouse. Come to us. I turn sharply, panic flooding my veins. But I see nothing. Nothing but the shadows, stretching ever longer, ever deeper. They become a part of this place, inseparable from the walls, the floors, the air itself. I stagger forward, fighting against the pull, trying to push back against the forces that are drawing me in. My heart pounds in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind is clouded, the edges of my vision growing blurry, as if I'm slipping in and out of consciousness. I want to scream, but my voice feels trapped inside me, suffocated by the pressure of the lighthouse's grip. "We can help you." The voice comes from behind me, soft and coaxing, but the darkness in it makes my skin crawl. It's one of them, the spirits, the souls trapped in this cursed place, their voices twisted with the agony of their eternal suffering. They want me. They want me to join them. But I can't. I won't. I can't let them take me. I press my palms against my ears, trying to block out the voices, but it doesn't work. The whispers continue, louder now, growing more frantic, more demanding. They're in my head now, inside my mind, seeping into every thought, every crack, every doubt. The lighthouse is alive, and it wants me. You cannot leave. You belong to the lighthouse now. The voice is clear, cold, and final, and it stops me in my tracks. I freeze, my breath caught in my throat, my body suddenly stiff. The words echo through my skull, bouncing off the walls of my mind. They are true, aren't they? I can feel it now, the truth settling in like a weight around my neck. I'm not leaving. I'm never leaving. I turn, desperate to escape the crushing weight of this realization, but the hallway is different now. The door I had come through is gone, replaced by a new one, dark and twisted, its wood warped and splintered. The walls around me bend, and I hear the low hum again, the same one that has haunted me since I first stepped foot on this island. It's vibrating in my chest now, pulsing through my veins. "We are waiting for you." I try to turn back, to escape, but my legs refuse to move. My body is betraying me. I can feel them now, touching me, pulling at me, their cold fingers like ice wrapping around my limbs. They won't let me go. They won't let me escape. They are too strong, and I am too weak. The lighthouse is consuming me, its darkness seeping into my very soul. There's nothing left. Nothing but the pull of the ghosts, the pull of the lighthouse. The struggle is over. I close my eyes, my mind shattering with the weight of it all. I am lost. I can't breathe. The air is thick, suffocating, pressing down on me like a vice. The lighthouse seems to pulse with a life of its own, the very walls humming in a rhythm that matches the rapid beat of my heart. I am trapped, no, more than that. I am being hunted. The ghosts have drawn closer, their presence so oppressive that I can feel their cold, clammy hands brushing against my skin. Their whispers are louder now, their voices no longer distant murmurs, but sharp, insistent commands. "You can't escape us." The voice comes from behind me, low and rasping, like the sound of old wood scraping against stone. My body tenses, and I whirl around, my fists clenched. "Stay away from me." I shout, the words a desperate attempt to assert control over this nightmare. But my defiance is met with only a laugh, low, hollow, and terrifying. The first ghost materializes before me, its face a twisted mask of agony and despair, its eyes empty and hollow, its mouth stretched in an eternal scream. It's a sailor, one of the lost souls bound to this place, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. I lunge at it, fists raised, but my hands pass through the specter's body as if it's made of smoke. The coldness that follows is so intense it almost knocks me off my feet, a shock that burns through my skin and deep into my bones. My chest tightens, my breath becoming shallow, and I stumble back. The ghost doesn't fade. Instead, it moves closer, its gaping mouth opening wide as though trying to swallow me whole. I feel the force of its hunger, its endless torment, and for a moment, I am frozen, paralyzed by the intensity of its gaze. The air crackles with energy, and I realize with a sinking feeling that it's feeding off my fear, drawing strength from my terror. You cannot resist, it whispers, and I can feel the words clawing at my mind, dragging me deeper into the abyss. I snap out of my daze, my survival instincts kicking in. My hands grab a nearby shard of glass, sharp and jagged. I swing it at the ghost, my movements frantic, desperate. But again, my strike passes right through it, leaving nothing but a ripple in the air. The ghost's laughter grows louder, more mocking, and the others begin to appear, more faces twisted in agony, more bodies flickering in and out of existence. You will be one of us. A wave of anger floods through me, and I lash out again, this time with words instead of violence. No! I won't let you take me. I don't know why I scream. I don't know why I try to fight. I know it's useless. Every attack, every desperate swing only seems to make the spirits stronger. They feed on my fear, growing more powerful with each futile attempt to break free. My hands shake, my vision blurs, and the walls close in around me, darkening the space until it feels like I'm standing at the edge of an endless void. Another ghost steps forward, its face a reflection of the first, but its eyes are no longer hollow. They are glowing, bright, white, burning with the light of pure malice. It raises a hand, and I feel my body freeze. I can't move, can't scream, can barely even breathe. My limbs are heavy, and my mind is slipping away, fading into the darkness. You cannot fight what is already inside you. The words echo, resonating deep in my chest, vibrating through every bone, every fiber of my being. I can feel the ghost's power wrapping around me, twisting itself into my very soul. It is inescapable. I gasp for air, my head spinning. The weight of the ghost's presence is unbearable, and I can feel my strength waning. My body trembles, my hands weak, my resolve shattered. Every breath I take feels like it's my last. My throat tightens, my vision darkens at the edges, and I know, with terrifying certainty, that I am losing. The ghosts are everywhere now, their forms flickering in and out of sight, growing more solid with every passing moment. I reach out, hands trembling, trying to grab hold of something, anything, to pull myself away from them. But there is nothing. Nothing but the cold, the darkness, and the voices that claw at my mind. You belong to us. I can feel the anger rising, the desperation boiling over, and I finally snap. I scream, a raw, primal sound that rips from my throat as I charge at the nearest ghost. I swing the shard of glass again and again, the jagged edges tearing through the air, but it's useless. It does nothing but make the spirits grow angrier, their forms flickering violently, their eyes burning with rage. The spirits are not afraid of me. They are feeding off me. And with every attack, they grow stronger, more vengeful. I fall to my knees, exhausted, defeated. The lighthouse has won. There's no escape. The spirits are closing in, their hands reaching for me, pulling at my skin, at my soul. Every inch of me is being consumed by their darkness, by their endless hunger. I try to fight back, try to scream again, but I have no strength left. I am lost. I am nothing. The spirits are everywhere. and they are not leaving. The darkness is thick, and the air feels as if it's pressing in on me, crushing me from all sides. I am suffocating. But despite the oppressive weight, something shifts inside me, something primal, something that flickers like a dying flame, refusing to be extinguished. The ghosts, their hunger, their cold fingers wrapped around my mind, they want me to give in. They want me to surrender. But I won't. Not yet. There's something in their voices that's changed. It's subtle at first, a crack in their endless whispers. I hear it, a hesitation, a word I recognize. Symbols. The word lingers in the air, like an echo of something I don't fully understand, but it grabs hold of me. I've been wrong all along. The ghosts, these tortured souls, they're trying to tell me something. They're showing me a way out, a way to fight back. I scramble to my feet, my mind racing, my heart pounding as I stumble back down the dimly lit hallway. The walls seem to pulse with a rhythm of their own, alive with the same hum that fills the air, vibrating in my bones. But now it's different. The hum is not just a sound anymore, it's a pattern, a structure, and I can almost see it in my mind, the shapes the spirits are forming, the symbols hidden within their tortured forms. I remember the tales the lighthouse keeper told me, the old legends of sailors who had disappeared, trapped in the curse of the lighthouse. The symbols, the ones carved into the stones, hidden beneath the layers of dust and time. There were symbols of protection, of binding, of banishment. I remember their faces, twisted in agony, yes, but also strained, desperate, as though they were trying to convey something through their suffering. A sharp pain shoots through my skull as the realization hits me. The ghosts are not just haunting me, they are trying to guide me. I feel the cold fingers of one of them brush my shoulder, and I turn, expecting to see nothing, but there's a flicker in the air, an image, a shape, just out of reach. It's a symbol, carved into the very fabric of the air itself, glowing faintly like a warning sign. It's there, just for a second, then gone again. But I've seen it. I've seen enough. My mind grasps the image, clinging to it, as though it's the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. I know what I must do. I have to find the right place, the right symbols. The ghosts, their power is tied to these marks. But binding marks, they can be used against them. It's the only way. I don't know how much time I have. The spirits are growing stronger, their presence more suffocating, but I push forward, moving through the shifting corridors of the lighthouse, searching. The walls are covered in ancient carvings, some worn away with time, others barely visible beneath layers of grime. My hands tremble as I trace them, feeling the energy pulse beneath my fingertips. The symbols are there, hidden in plain sight. I find one, a simple design, but it resonates with power. A circle, an interlocking triangle. A symbol of protection. I hesitate only for a moment, knowing that this is no ordinary mark. It's a weapon, a key to their chains, and if I'm wrong, it could all be over. But I don't care anymore. I can feel the spirits closing in, their voices louder, more insistent. They know what I'm doing. They're angry. I find the place where the symbol fits, a wall near the base of the lighthouse, where the foundation meets the stone floor. There's a hollow sound beneath my touch, as if the earth itself is reacting to the symbol. With trembling hands, I trace the edges of the design, my fingers raw against the cold stone. I whisper the words I heard, the words the ghosts had tried to speak to me, the ones I didn't understand at first. The language is ancient, twisted, the words foreign, yet they flow from my mouth with an ease that scares me. The air around me shudders, and I can feel the weight of the curse that binds the spirits lifting, but it's not gone. Not yet. A low rumble shakes the ground beneath my feet, and I know the lighthouse is fighting back. The ghosts are angry, furious at being thwarted. They scream in my mind, their voices so loud, so shrill, that my skull feels like it's going to crack open. The air grows colder, and the darkness grows deeper. My breath comes in ragged gasps as I press harder, trying to focus, trying to remember everything I've learned, everything I've seen. But it's too late. I feel the cold hands wrap around my throat before I even hear the footsteps. The ghost is on me, its form materializing in a blur of pale light and darkness. Its face is twisted, its mouth open in a silent scream, its eyes burning with fury. "You shouldn't have done that," it whispers, its voice more dangerous than any sound I've heard before. The room spins as I struggle to free myself, but the force of its grip is too much. The symbols I've carved into the wall, the protection they promised, it's not enough. The lighthouse itself is alive, and it is stronger than anything I can fight. The ground beneath me cracks open, and the very walls begin to buckle as the spirits close in. The symbol I thought would save me is fading, its power weakening, and with it, my hope. The ghosts press harder, pulling me down, pulling me into their eternal darkness. I try to scream, but no sound escapes my lips. The lighthouse is taking me, just like it has taken so many others before me. I realize, too late, that I was never meant to fight back. The lighthouse always wins. The walls of the lighthouse tremble with a deep, ancient energy. I can feel it in my bones, the weight of the curse, the pull of the spirits. They are no longer whispering, no longer lurking in the shadows. They are here, in full force, their presence overwhelming, consuming. My body is shaking, my mind unraveling, but I refuse to give in. I am not done yet. Not after everything I've been through. I look around, the lighthouse now a twisted labyrinth of stone and shadow, and I know there is no way out. The symbols I traced, the rituals I tried, they were supposed to protect me, to banish the spirits, but they've failed. The ghosts are more powerful than I could have ever imagined. They are everywhere now, materializing from the walls, the floors, their cold hands grasping at my body, at my mind. Their faces are twisted in agony, their eyes pleading, desperate. But they're not the only ones here. The sound of footsteps echoes through the halls, slow and deliberate. I freeze, my heart skipping a beat. For a moment, I think it's another spirit, another shadow come to claim me. But then I see him. The lighthouse keeper. He's standing in the doorway, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes empty, like the ghosts that now surround me. There's no warmth in his expression, no kindness, only a knowing, malevolent look. "You," I rasp, the word coming out as more of a question than a statement. "You knew." He steps forward, his heavy boots echoing in the silence. His gaze never leaves mine, and I can feel the weight of his words before he even speaks. "You should have left when you had the chance," he says, his voice low, gravelly, as though it's been drowned in the sea. "You didn't listen to the warning. No one ever does." His words don't make sense at first, but then the truth hits me. The keeper, the one who had warned me, who had seemed so strange, so distant, he's not just a keeper. He's part of the curse. A servant of the lighthouse, a guardian bound to it for eternity. The realization crashes into me like a wave. The keeper isn't just a man who maintains the lighthouse. He is its anchor, its gatekeeper. He's the reason the spirits are trapped here, the reason they can never escape. He made a deal, he made a pact with the spirits long ago, binding them to this place in exchange for power, for immortality. You were one of them, weren't you? I ask, my voice trembling but firm. You're dead too. The keeper doesn't respond right away. Instead, he looks over his shoulder at the shadows creeping along the walls, at the twisted, tortured faces of the sailors. They're silent now, watching him with hollow eyes, their forms flickering like fragile flames in the wind. I can feel the anger rising in them, a growing tide of rage that threatens to drown us all. You're wrong, the keeper says, finally meeting my gaze. His voice is filled with a quiet, terrible certainty. I'm more than dead. I'm the one who keeps them here. I'm the one who holds them in this place. Without me, they would all escape. They would be free. His words sent a chill down my spine. The lighthouse keeper has become the thing he once feared most. He has become the very thing that has held these souls captive for so long, and now he's part of the curse. He is as trapped as they are, bound to this lighthouse, bound to the spirits he helped imprison. The ghosts begin to move closer, their spectral hands reaching for me, their mouths stretching into silent screams. But there's something different about them now. Their faces, once full of anguish, are now twisted with fury, hatred directed at the keeper himself. You, one of the ghosts moans, its voice a dry whisper that echoes in the dark. You kept us here. The keeper's eyes flicker with something, fear? Guilt? It's gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. You'll never understand, he mutters, barely audible. The power I gained, the eternity I was promised. I couldn't let them go. Not for anything. I see it now, the true nature of the curse. It's not just the spirits that are bound to the lighthouse. It's him too. The keeper's pact with the ghosts has kept him alive for generations, but at what cost? He is no longer a man. He is an extension of the lighthouse, a part of the curse itself. He is as much a prisoner as the sailors he betrayed. The ground beneath me rumbles, and I feel the lighthouse shift. The spirits are no longer passive. They are rising with fury, their ethereal forms coalescing into a mass of writhing shadows, their eyes burning with rage. They are going to tear him apart. And they are going to tear me apart too. I don't have much time. I rush forward, my heart pounding in my chest. There is no thought in my mind, only instinct. The keeper watches me with cold, indifferent eyes as I pass him, and I can feel the power of the ghosts growing stronger with every step I take. I need to act fast. The lighthouse is alive, its walls are shifting, its pulse quickening as if it's preparing to consume us all. In a burst of clarity, I reach for one last symbol. The final key to breaking the curse. The keeper's eyes widen as he realizes what I'm doing. No, he shouts, but it's too late. The ground beneath us cracks open, and the symbol I carve into the stone begins to glow. The walls tremble, the spirits scream in a chorus of rage, but the power of the symbol is undeniable. It is burning through the air, cutting through the curse like a knife. The ghosts howl as they begin to dissipate, their forms unraveling into nothingness. The keeper, his face twisted with terror, reaches out a hand to stop me, but the light from the symbol envelopes him, pulling him into the darkness. He is screaming now, just like the ghosts, his final, desperate cry echoing through the lighthouse. But it's no use. The curse has been broken. The spirits are free. The lighthouse keeper is no more. And I am left standing in the silence, the weight of the curse lifting from my shoulders, the darkness finally receding. But as I take a step back, The ground beneath me shifts once more, and I realize with horror, this is not over. I stand at the center of the lighthouse, the air thick with a charged energy that crackles like static. The silence is deafening, and for a moment, I think I might be dreaming. Perhaps this is all an illusion, a trick played by my mind, twisted by terror, by the long hours I've spent alone on this forsaken island. But no! The air is too cold, the darkness too deep, and the tremor I feel beneath my feet is far too real. I look around, hoping to see the world I knew, hoping that the lighthouse has released me, that the spirits have finally been laid to rest. But I can feel it now, deep in my bones. There is something still here, something watching me. It's the lighthouse itself, I realize, the cursed stone that has anchored this place in time. The battle I fought, the rituals, the symbol that burned with the light of salvation, they were never enough. The curse cannot be broken completely. The lighthouse will always claim what it is owed. I step backward, my breath shallow, my mind racing. I've come so close to escaping, so close to freedom. But now, as the walls close in around me, I know. The ghosts have been released, yes, but there is always a price. The lighthouse keeper, his role, his pact, was the final link in the chain. I was never meant to leave. I am now as much a part of this place as the spirits that haunt it. The ground shifts again, and I stumble, my hands grasping for something, anything to steady me. But the stone walls are slick with condensation, the air thick with the scent of salt and decay. The lighthouse is alive, alive in a way I cannot comprehend. It has fed on the souls of its victims for generations, and I am no different from them. The hum in the air intensifies, like a low, vibrating heartbeat. I can feel it now, the pull, the force dragging me toward the heart of the lighthouse. The center where all the horrors began. The place where time stops, where the souls of the lost are eternally bound to the stone. I try to fight it. I try to move toward the door, but it's no use. My legs feel heavy, like they are being pulled back by invisible chains. The lighthouse is pulling me, calling me to it. And somewhere deep within me, I know there is no escape. Suddenly, I hear their voices. The ghostly sailors, the ones who had once been so desperate to escape, now whispering my name. Their voices are soft at first, like the wind rustling through the trees, but soon they grow louder, more insistent. Come to us. You belong here. You will never leave. I shake my head, trying to block them out. But it's futile. They are everywhere, in my ears, in my mind. The walls pulse with their presence, their agony. I can see their faces, twisted, tortured, their eyes wide with pain as they reach for me, as they beckon me into the dark depths of the lighthouse. I fight back with every ounce of strength I have left. I scream, I claw at the walls, but the lighthouse does not relent. It is like trying to fight the ocean. It pulls, it pushes, it drowns everything in its wake. And then I hear it, one last whisper, one last breath of hope. There is one way out. I freeze, my heart pounding. The voice is familiar, not one of the lost souls, but something else. Something older. I turn toward the source of the voice, and there, at the top of the stairs, stands the lighthouse keeper. His face is no longer the hollow, emotionless mask it once was. There is a sadness in his eyes, a sorrow that stretches back through the centuries. He knows what is happening, what has happened. And he knows what I must do. I take a hesitant step toward him. He raises a hand, a silent gesture for me to come closer. But the lighthouse trembles beneath us, and the walls groan in protest. This is not a time for hesitation. I can feel it now. My time is running out. The keeper's voice is barely a whisper, but it cuts through the chaos like a knife. The pact, it's broken, but not undone. You are caught between worlds now. You can either stay or become one of us. I feel the coldness of his words seep into me. I know what he means. The choice is mine now. I can either let myself be claimed by the lighthouse, become a part of its cursed history, or I can find a way to break free, to sever the final bond that ties me to this place. My vision blurs, the edges of the lighthouse warping around me. The pull is stronger now, harder to resist. My breath comes in shallow gasps, my chest tightening with each passing second. I want to fight. I want to escape. But deep down, I know the truth. There is no escape. The lighthouse has claimed me, just as it has claimed every soul before me. The ground splits beneath my feet, and I fall into the darkness. The final scream of the ghosts rings in my ears as I sink deeper into the abyss. And as the light fades, I realize with horror that I am no different from the lost sailors now. Bound to the lighthouse. Bound to the curse. I am a part of it. And it will never let me go. The air is thick, suffocating, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I am no longer pulled toward the lighthouse. I can still feel its weight, like an anchor at the bottom of the ocean, but the force that once drew me in has lessened, like the final echoes of a terrible storm. I stand in the center of the lighthouse, disoriented. My limbs ache from the struggle, my mind frayed and torn by the horrors I've witnessed. The ghosts, those tortured souls, no longer seem to haunt me with their relentless whispers. For the first time, the air feels still, and the silence is deafening. But it's not peaceful. It never will be. The silence, I realize, is a warning. The lighthouse is still here, still watching me. And yet, something has changed. There, in the corner of my eye, something flickers. A shadow, a faint movement. I turn toward it, instinctively reaching out, but nothing is there. Still, the sensation lingers, like a door half open, a way out that I had not noticed before. I step toward the staircase, my body unwilling to move in a straight line, my balance uneven. The world around me feels unreal, like a dream I can't wake from, but I cannot ignore the pull of the door that seems to have appeared. No, it was always there, waiting. I step cautiously, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body moves forward despite my fear. The light from the lanterns flickers and goes out with a gust of cold wind. The darkness fills the room, swallowing the corners where the ghosts used to appear. Yet, there's something in the air now, a subtle shift, like the tension before a storm breaks. I feel it in my chest, a crack, a shift in the air, and in that moment, I understand. The lighthouse is giving me a way out. But there is no such thing as a free escape. The air around me crackles again, colder this time, sharper. My breath catches in my throat as the ghosts materialize around me, more than I have ever seen before. Their forms are like wisps of smoke, shifting between solid and spectral. Their eyes are dark pools of suffering, the weight of centuries of torment reflected in their gaze. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their presence alone is enough to freeze my heart, to remind me of the price. I look toward the door. It stands at the far end of the room, a single, crumbling exit that seems almost too far to reach. I don't know how much time I have before the lighthouse decides to pull me back, before it reclaims me as one of its own. As I step forward, the first ghost, a man whose face is half rotted away, his eyes hollow, lurches toward me. He raises a hand, fingers stretched, as if reaching for me, but then he stops. The other spirits follow suit, silent, waiting. There is no need for words now. I can feel their hunger, their need for me to stay. You cannot leave, the ghost's voice reverberates in my mind, deep and haunting, not without paying the price. My pulse quickens. I don't know what they mean. What price? The price for freedom. The price of escaping this place. But I already know. I reach the door, my hand shaking as I grasp the handle. It is cold, slick with moisture, but it gives way, creaking open into the thick, oppressive darkness. The lighthouse behind me looms, its walls pressing on me as if to pull me back. The hum of the spirits grows louder, their voices reverberating in my skull. You belong here. One whispers. You will never be free. The wind outside is sharp, biting, but it offers a sliver of hope, a taste of the outside world. I step forward, crossing the threshold. But as I do, the ground beneath me shakes violently, and the air snaps tight around me. Suddenly, the ghosts swarm in, their forms closing in on me. The cold, frigid air cuts through me like 1,000 icy needles. I can feel their hands on me, pulling me, trying to drag me back into the abyss. The price is paid, a voice intones, one I do not recognize. It's not one of the lost souls. It's something deeper, something older, from within the lighthouse itself. One must stay, to make room for the others. I scream, but the wind carries my voice away. The lighthouse is taking its due, and it is too late for me to turn back. I fight, my body pulling toward the door, but the pressure against me is unbearable. The spirits press harder, their hands like iron chains. And then, with a final, deafening crack, the spirits release me. I stumble forward, into the night, gasping for breath, the cold air filling my lungs. I feel the wind tug at my clothes, the weight of the island lifting, but the ghosts remain behind, their cries echoing in the darkness. I am free, but at what cost? I glance back, the lighthouse now a silhouette against the moonlit sky. The ghosts are still there, waiting. I don't know if they'll ever leave, if they'll ever find peace. And I don't know what price they've taken from me. The island feels smaller now, as though the very land has rejected me. The lighthouse is a distant, menacing shadow on the horizon. The price I paid for my escape is something I cannot yet understand. And though I am free, I know I will never truly escape its grasp. The island is still with me. The lighthouse is still calling. And the ghosts, they are never far away. The island feels different now. The air, thick with dread, presses down on my chest, making each breath feel like I'm inhaling through a wet cloth. I move slowly, every step fighting against an invisible force that clings to my skin, like the land itself doesn't want me to leave. The wind has stopped, but I can feel its presence, a quiet murmur beneath the surface, as though the earth itself is holding its breath, waiting for me to falter. I glance back at the lighthouse. It looms tall in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the night sky. The shadows around it stretch long, as if reaching for me. It's as though the island itself has become a trap, a living thing that has come to life once again, determined to keep me here. But I can't go back. I can't give in. The sea, which had once seemed so vast and endless, now appears deceptively calm, its surface smooth like glass. The waves, once angry and fierce, have quieted, almost unnaturally so. The boats I had seen earlier, the ones that seem to beckon me to freedom, are nowhere in sight. It's just me and the lighthouse, and I am fighting everything in me to escape its curse. The path to the shore seems endless. Each step takes more effort than the last, the ground beneath me soft and treacherous. I feel a sudden, overwhelming pressure, like the island is trying to drag me back into its depths. The trees, once swaying in the wind, now stand silent, their branches twisted, almost accusing. The island is watching me, waiting for me to fail. I look up at the sky. The stars are barely visible, shrouded by a thick fog that's rolling in. The moon is hidden behind a veil of clouds, casting everything in shadow. It's as though the world around me is closing in, making escape impossible. I take a few more steps, my muscles burning from the strain, my mind screaming at me to keep moving. But the weight of the island is suffocating, pressing against my lungs, clouding my thoughts. The feeling of dread has become overwhelming. I feel it in my chest, a constant, throbbing pulse that I can't shake. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoes behind me. I freeze, heart pounding in my ears. I don't have to turn around to know what it is. The ghosts are with me, following, whispering from the darkness. I can feel their presence like a cold wind, their eyes on my back, pulling at me, urging me to return. "You cannot leave," a voice whispers in my ear. It's a voice I recognize, one of the sailors, his voice filled with sorrow and rage. "You are ours now, forever bound to the lighthouse." I push forward, ignoring the voices. I have to get to the shore. I have to find a way to break free. The sea may be calm, but I can't trust it. The lighthouse controls this place, and the sea is just another part of its twisted grip. The footsteps grow louder, closer. I look behind me, and for a moment, I see nothing. Just the shadows of the trees, the empty path. But then, there they are. The ghosts, their forms translucent but still solid in my vision. Their faces twisted in agony, their eyes pleading. I stumble backward, my legs giving way beneath me, but I force myself to stand. There is no room for weakness. I can't let the island win. I turn back to the shore, desperate to escape, but the path ahead seems longer now. The distance between me and the water stretches, as if the island is constantly shifting, pulling me further away from my goal. The air grows colder, the fog thicker. My breath forms clouds in front of me as if the island itself is exhaling, trapping me in a frozen grip. The sea appears untouched, unchanging, but I know better. I know that the calm is a lie. "Leave this place," one of the ghosts cries out. "There is no escape from here." I push forward, my footsteps faltering as I fight the pull of the island. The ground beneath me seems to shift, like it's not solid, but soft, like the very earth is being consumed by something dark, something far older than I can comprehend. The lighthouse is silent now, its shadow stretching impossibly far across the shore. But the whispers remain. They're all around me, growing louder, louder until it feels like my skull might crack from the pressure. I reach the water's edge, but I don't stop. I wade into the shallows, the cold biting at my skin. The ocean is still, unearthingly still, and as I look out at the horizon, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me from out there, from beyond the waves. But then, through the fog, I see it. A boat. It's small, worn, the wood weathered by years of salt and sun. I don't care who left it or why. I don't care if it's a trick. It's my only chance. I move toward it, my legs trembling beneath me, my heart racing. The boat is empty, waiting, but I can feel the weight of something inside it, something dark, something that isn't right. I force myself to board, grabbing the oars, pushing off into the water. The island looms behind me, its silhouette now just a shadow in the mist. I row, my arms burning with the effort. The boat moves slowly at first, but then it picks up speed, the pull of the island weakening, the weight lifting from my chest. The air grows lighter, the fog beginning to dissipate. For the first time since I arrived, I dare to look back. The lighthouse stands tall, its beam of light cutting through the mist, still watching, still waiting. But I am free, or so I believe. The sea is calm, but the dread lingers in the pit of my stomach. I can feel it now, the price I paid for my freedom. The ghosts are still with me, their whispers trailing behind, fading, but not gone. As I row further into the night, I know this island will never truly leave me. The lighthouse will always be there, in the back of my mind, in the depths of the ocean, pulling me back to its dark heart. And the ghosts, like the island, will never truly let me go. The boat is moving faster now, the oars cutting through the water with ease, but a chill has settled deep inside me. I thought I had escaped the island, the lighthouse, the ghosts. But even as I row farther from the shore, I can still feel them, watching from the depths. The dread is still with me, gnawing at my bones, and I know that nothing about this place will ever leave me untouched. Suddenly, the quiet is broken. A voice, low, cold, familiar, cuts through the stillness. You cannot escape. I freeze, the oars frozen in my hands, the boat rocking gently in the water. My blood runs cold. It's the lighthouse keeper's voice. But where is he? How did he? I turn, and there, standing at the edge of the boat, as if he had always been there, is the keeper. His figure is cloaked in shadows, his face partially obscured by the night. But I recognize him immediately. It's him, the one who warned me, the one who seemed to know too much about the island's curse. His eyes are hollow, dark as the depths of the sea. He's not the man I remember. No, this isn't the same person. His face is twisted, stretched by something far older and far darker than mere age or time. You should never have left, he says, his voice a rasping whisper. There is no escape from the curse of the lighthouse. You were never meant to leave. You were chosen. I try to push the boat forward, but the water is suddenly thick, as if the very sea has conspired against me. The oars feel heavy, as if they are sinking into the depths with each stroke. I look back again, and the lighthouse is no longer a distant shadow. It stands tall on the shore, its light flickering like the heartbeat of some ancient, malevolent thing. The keeper's form shifts unnaturally, as if he's part of the very mist that swirls around me. I try to speak, but my throat is dry, tight, like the air itself has thickened. Who are you? I manage to choke out, my voice hoarse, trembling. What do you want from me? He smiles, though the expression is empty, like a mask worn too long. I was the first to be trapped, he says, his voice echoing in the night. And now, you will join me. All who come to this lighthouse are bound to it, as I was, as you will be. We are the keepers of the curse. And now, you are too. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The reality of it crashes down, this place, this island, this cursed beacon that calls to lost souls. It's not just a lighthouse. It's a prison, a dark force that claims anyone foolish enough to get too close. But I tried to escape, I stammer, my heart racing. I rode away. I left. The keeper shakes his head slowly, his eyes gleaming with something almost akin to pity. You never truly left. The curse doesn't let go. It pulls at you, wraps around your soul. You are marked now. No matter where you go, the lighthouse will find you. I look at him, desperate, trying to understand. Why? Why did you do this? Why didn't you warn me more? His smile fades, and for a moment, I see something else, a flicker of regret. I didn't want this, he admits, his voice suddenly soft, almost human. I was just like you once, curious, naive. The lighthouse, it offers power, knowledge. It takes what you want and gives you something else. Something far worse. The pact, it was made long ago. With something older than this island. Something that has no mercy. I take a step back, fear rising in my chest, a cold knot tightening. A pact. I whisper, barely able to breathe. The keeper nods, the shadows swallowing his features. Yes. The lighthouse was built to guard something. And in return, we were all promised freedom, freedom from death, from pain. But the price was steep. We gave ourselves to the island. We became part of its curse. Bound to it forever. I try to grasp what he's saying. But I'm not like you, I say, my voice trembling. I haven't made any pact. I didn't agree to this. You did when you came here, he replies, his tone sharp. The moment you set foot on this island, you became part of the story. The lighthouse has its way with all who arrive. You'll be given a choice soon, stay here and take your place among the others, or fight, knowing that the island will never stop calling you back. There's no winning. There's only being. I want to scream, to throw him overboard, but something deeper holds me in place. The boat seems to stop moving altogether now, the water still and unyielding beneath me. I look up at the keeper once more, and his eyes lock onto mine, pulling me in. This is how it ends, he says, his voice now a low, final whisper. This is the price we all pay. I stare at the lighthouse, knowing what I must face. The dark truth about its origins is too much to bear. It isn't just a place. It's a curse. And there's no escaping it. The keeper's smile stretches wider, no longer human, as the fog rolls in, thickening, suffocating. Your soul is already mine, he murmurs. And now, you will stay with me, forever. The fog rises around us, thick and impenetrable. I try to scream, but my voice is lost in the sound of the crashing waves. The lighthouse looms behind me, closer than ever. And as the darkness swallows me whole, I realize the truth, the island was never meant to let anyone leave. And now, neither will I. The air grows thick with dread as the fog presses in around me, making the world feel small, suffocating. My hands grip the oars, but they seem to have no strength left, as if the very act of rowing is futile. It's then, amidst the growing panic, that I notice something far worse than any ghost or phantom I've encountered so far. The island. It's moving. The realization hits me like a physical blow. The water beneath the boat is no longer calm. The waves are rising, but they're not natural. They ripple with a strange, pulsating rhythm, like the heartbeat of some massive, unseen creature. I glance behind me, and the lighthouse stands, its beams still cutting through the dark, but the island around it seems alive. The trees, the rocks, even the very soil, it all seems to shift, to breathe. The landscape twists in unnatural patterns, reshaping itself as though some dark force is manipulating it. I try to steady myself, my heart pounding in my chest. I've never believed in superstition, never believed in the idea that the land itself could be anything but lifeless. But now, standing here, with the boat nearly immobile and the island rising and falling like a living thing, I can no longer deny it. The island is alive. As the boat rocks, a wave crashes into me, splashing water over the edge. I look up in time to see something disturbing, a shadow under the water, moving quickly, just beneath the surface. A shape, too large to be anything natural. It's as if the island itself is breathing, pulsing with a dark energy, pulling me back toward its depths. I scream, trying to row harder, but the oars are useless. The sea no longer obeys the laws of nature. It bends to something darker, something older. The realization that I am no longer in control, the island has taken over, floods me with terror. You can't leave, a voice whispers from the water. It's not the keeper this time. It's not a ghost. It's something deeper, something more ancient. The island itself, alive and aware. The ground beneath me shifts, and I nearly lose my balance in the boat. I look ahead, my eyes wide with horror, and I see it now, roots, twisted in black, pushing through the earth, extending like fingers reaching out to claim me. The island is feeding, pulling me into its core, drawing me closer with every passing moment. The air is thick with the stench of decay, like the earth is rotting beneath me. I try to escape, to paddle toward the shore, but it's no use. The island's pull is too strong. It's as if the earth itself is hungry, starved for the souls of those who come near. I realize then, the lighthouse, the keeper, the ghosts, they are all part of the same dark, insidious force. The island feeds off the souls of the lost, luring them in with promises of escape, only to trap them forever. You are mine, the voice continues, its tone both terrifying and seductive. You sought to leave, but this island, it will never let you go. We all feed together. You will become part of me. I try to scream, to fight back, but the boat is moving with the current now, the water's swallowing me whole. The island is no longer just a place, it is a living, breathing entity, and I am its prey. My breath comes in ragged gasps, and the oars slip from my hands. I don't have the strength to fight anymore. The island has taken me, and with each passing second, I feel myself being drawn closer to its heart, a heart that beats with the pulse of every soul it has ever claimed. As I'm pulled toward the shore, I realize the terrible truth. The island isn't just a place where souls are lost. It is a being, a predator, feeding off the spirits of those who are drawn to it, devouring them as it slowly, inexorably claims more. And now, I am one of them. I look back one final time toward the lighthouse, but it's no longer just a building. It is a part of the island, a part of the living entity that has been waiting for me. The beacon of light fades, replaced by a terrible darkness, and I know there is no escape. The island has fed, and it is satisfied. The boat lurches as I row with desperate, trembling hands. The island is now just a silhouette in the distance, swallowed by the thick, oppressive fog. I dare not look back. The only sound is the rhythmic splash of the oars cutting through the water, each stroke propelling me further away from the nightmare I've just survived. But no matter how far I row, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching, waiting for me to falter. I glance over my shoulder, heart hammering in my chest, but there's nothing. Just the cold, vast expanse of the ocean. The island is out of sight now, yet the unease in my gut refuses to fade. The air is heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness. The ocean, once tumultuous and alive with the island's pull, now feels eerily calm. Too calm. I can't tell if I've truly escaped or if the island's grip is still tightening. The fog is thickening around me, swallowing the horizon, and I feel the sensation that I'm not alone. There's a whisper in the wind, a sound like the soft scrape of oars against water, but when I turn, there's nothing there. Just the empty, unending expanse of the sea. I try to focus, to clear my mind, but I can't shake the sense that the island hasn't let go of me. The shadows from the lighthouse still linger in my thoughts, the faces of the trapped sailors haunting me. I see them in the corners of my vision, their twisted, anguished expressions forever burned into my mind. I hear their cries, soft at first, then growing louder, as if they are right beside me, their hands reaching out from the depths. "You can never leave," they whisper in my ear, their voices a haunting echo. "You belong to us now." I can feel their presence in the air, in the water, in the very boat I sit in. The eerie calm of the sea feels like a trap, an illusion meant to make me believe I've escaped. But I know better. The island's curse is far-reaching. It doesn't let go so easily. I try to convince myself that I've broken free, that I've escaped its pull, but the doubt gnaws at me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the lighthouse's light cutting through the fog, beckoning me back, as if it's alive and calling my name. The darkness at the edge of the world feels infinite, stretching endlessly, as if the island's boundaries have no true end. Is it behind me, or is it within me? The boat rocks again, but this time the movement feels different. The waters shift under me, not from the wind or the waves, but from something deeper, something beneath the surface. I can feel the pull of the island again, subtle but unmistakable. It's like the very ocean is trying to drag me back, to reclaim me as one of its own. I fight against it, my muscles aching, the weight of my fear pressing down on me like a physical force. The whispers grow louder, and I see the ghostly sailors again, their hollow eyes filled with anguish, their hands reaching up from the water, as if begging me to join them. I try to row. Faster, my heart pounding in my chest, but it's useless. The boat seems to slow, as though the island itself is pulling against it. I shake my head, trying to banish the thought. I can't be losing my mind again, can I? The darkness of the water is vast, but there's nothing there. No voices. No hands reaching out. But then, a cold touch brushes my shoulder. I freeze, the oars stopping mid-stroke. My breath catches in my throat, and for a moment, I can't move. There's no one there. No figure, no ghost. Just the wind, the water, and the oppressive silence. But I feel it. The island's presence. It's here, in the very air I breathe, in the boat I sit in. It's still with me. The curse. The darkness. The hunger. I start rowing again, faster this time, my fear escalating with each stroke. The fog feels thicker, heavier, and I know, deep down, that the island is never truly far. It's not just a place. It's a force. And it has claimed me. The shoreline is still far off, but I can't stop now. I row with everything I have left, but the whispers come again, closer now, louder, filling my head with their wretched voices. You can never leave. I don't know if I've escaped or if I'm still trapped. I don't know if the boat will ever reach the shore or if the island will pull me back into its depths. All I know is that the island is still with me. It's in my mind, in my blood, in the very air I breathe. And no matter how far I row, no matter how hard I fight, I can never truly escape. I thought leaving the island would bring freedom. That the further I sailed away, the more the weight of the lighthouse would lift from my shoulders. But as I sit here, on solid ground once more, I realize how wrong I was. The island is still with me. It's never truly gone. The day is clear. The sun shines brightly on the horizon, casting long shadows across the shore. The boat creaks beneath me as I pull it up onto the beach. I take a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air, the scent of salt water, so different from the stifling, decayed atmosphere of the island. The world is still, peaceful even. Yet inside me, there's a storm. I walk away from the boat, my feet sinking into the soft sand, but every step feels heavy. The distant roar of the ocean is a stark contrast to the silence that presses against my ears. It's as though I can still hear the waves crashing against the rocks of the lighthouse. The sound lingers, echoing in the back of my mind, no matter how far I go. I've left the island. I've escaped its clutches, or so I tell myself. But the isolation I once sought, the solitude I thought would heal me, now feels like a cage. The silence is suffocating. The world around me is so empty. The beach, the trees in the distance, the sky above, they all feel distant, detached. And the deeper I walk into the woods beyond the shore, the more the weight on my chest grows. The isolation isn't peaceful. It's like being surrounded by a void. The lighthouse, it's still there. Not physically, of course. But I feel it, pressing against my thoughts like a shadow, always just beyond my reach. I try to shake it off, to focus on the reality of being free, but every corner I turn, every shadow I pass, it's there. That nagging sensation that I'm being watched. I sit down on a fallen log, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves does nothing to ease my growing panic. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to block out the image of the lighthouse, but it's in my mind now, as it's been in my nightmares. The beam of light, cutting through the fog. The keeper's eyes, watching me from the threshold. The sailors, their faces twisted in agony. The lighthouse was never just a place. It was a part of me, of my mind, of my very soul. It lives inside me now. Every thought I have, every movement I make, it's there. And I can't escape it. I stand up suddenly, as though the act of standing might somehow rid me of the weight pressing on my chest. I pace in circles, my fingers trembling as I grip my arms, trying to hold myself together. But the whispers begin again. Soft at first, like a breeze rustling through the trees, but growing louder with each passing second. You can never leave. I stop, breath caught in my throat. The air is thick, like the very forest is closing in around me. My skin crawls, and I look around, half expecting to see the shadows of the ghosts rising from the ground. But there's nothing. Just the trees. Just the quiet. And yet the presence of the island is here, within me, a constant reminder that I've never truly left. The darkness is no longer just something I can see, it's something I feel, creeping beneath my skin, digging into my bones. I walk faster now, my steps frantic, but it doesn't help. The sense of being suffocated, of being watched, only intensifies. I return to the shore, the beach now feeling more like a trap than a haven. The horizon stretches out before me, the ocean calm and endless, but I can't shake the feeling that something is just beneath the surface, waiting for me to slip. I drop to my knees in the sand, my hands shaking as I press them against my forehead. It's over, I whisper to myself. You're free. It's over. But the words are hollow. I know the truth now. The island, the lighthouse, it's all still here, inside me. And no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it will never leave. The curse isn't bound by place. It's bound to the soul, and I am its prisoner. As the sun begins to set, the shadows grow longer, and I feel the first stirrings of dread crawl through me. The lighthouse is out there, on the edge of the world, but it's also here, in this moment, in the very air I breathe. I close my eyes, and for the briefest of moments, I think I hear the hum of the lighthouse's light. I open my eyes, but there's nothing. Just the quiet. The silence is deafening, and it's never going to stop. The days blur together. I try to immerse myself in normal life, to regain some sense of routine, but it's like swimming against a current. No matter how far I go, how many places I visit, the island clings to me. The memories, the whispers, they follow me like a shadow, refusing to let me go. I'm staying in a small, rented cabin near the coast. It's supposed to be a place of quiet, a refuge from everything. The walls are thin, and the wooden floors creak as the wind blows against the roof. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks is constant, almost comforting. But it isn't. It's never enough to drown out the gnawing unease that claws at my insides. I find myself staring out the window often, watching the horizon, half expecting to see the dark silhouette of the lighthouse looming over the water. But it's never there. The island, with its cold stone walls and cursed light, is miles away. Still, it lingers in the back of my mind, waiting to spring forward, to remind me that I can never truly escape. At night, the nightmares return. I close my eyes, and I'm back on that island, standing alone in the lighthouse, the wind howling, the sea crashing violently against the rocks below. The ghosts are there, their pale faces twisted in eternal agony, their voices calling to me from the dark. They beg for release, just as I once did. You can never leave. I hear it in my dreams, and I hear it in my waking moments too. A whisper in the wind. A sound in the darkness. The faintest echo of footsteps behind me. I look over my shoulder, heart racing, but there's no one there. Only the empty space, the cold emptiness that surrounds me. It's like the island has seeped into everything. Into the air I breathe. Into the spaces I move through. I feel the pull again, subtle but unmistakable. The ghosts are still here. Their presence, heavy and oppressive, fills the room with a suffocating silence. I can't escape them. I can't escape what happened. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. The sailors. The keeper. Their tortured expressions haunt me, their outstretched hands begging for help I can't give. They're not just memories, they're a part of me now. A curse etched into my soul. I try to shake it off, to convince myself that I'm being irrational, that it's all in my head. But the fear, deep, gnawing fear, never fully fades. I can't explain it, can't reason it away. The very thought that I might be losing my mind terrifies me more than anything the island could have shown me. The silence is deafening. The world outside looks peaceful, but I know better now. The calmness is a lie. There is something always watching. Something always waiting. I take walks to clear my head, hoping the open air will help. The small coastal town I'm staying in is quiet, peaceful even, but it's too quiet. The people here are friendly enough, but I can't escape the feeling that they're distant. Like they're unaware of the true weight that hangs in the air. I try to speak to others, to force myself to connect, but I'm met with blank stares. It's like they can't see what I see. Every conversation feels hollow, every interaction strained. I find myself looking at them, wondering if they, too, are haunted. But the truth is, I can't trust anyone anymore. I can't trust myself. The memories are there, always bubbling to the surface. The whisper of the wind through the trees reminds me of the lighthouse's beam. The soft rustling of the leaves sounds like the footsteps of the lost souls. I hear the cries of the sailors in every creak of the floor, every gust of wind. I try to bury it, to push the memories down, but they keep resurfacing. They're becoming too real to ignore. The lighthouse, the ghosts, they're not just things from the past. They're part of me now. They always will be. I wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the air thick with an oppressive weight. The room is still, but the silence feels wrong. It feels like something is waiting. I reach for the lamp beside my bed, my hand shaking as I turn it on. The light flickers weakly at first, then steadies. Nothing. There's nothing there. But the air is heavier now, colder, like the room itself is closing in on me. I lie back down, my heart racing in my chest, but I can't sleep. The island isn't far away. It's never far. The pull is always there, the ghosts always whispering, always just behind me, no matter how far I run. The island is inside me, and I'll never be rid of it. I'll never be rid of them. The curse isn't something that can be outrun. It follows you. Always. I was sitting in the small cafe by the pier, sipping a coffee that had long gone cold. The warmth of the cup should have been comforting, but it only seemed to highlight the gnawing chill in my bones. The morning sun was weak, filtered through a thick haze of clouds that made the town feel more like a dream, distant and insubstantial. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was subtle, at first, like a shiver that ran down your spine when you think someone is standing just behind you. I told myself it was just nerves, that I was still shaken from the island. But the whispers, the faint voices in the wind, they were never truly gone. The bell above the cafe door chimed as someone entered. I glanced up, half expecting it to be a local, someone going about their day without a care. But it wasn't. The man who walked in was tall, his face withered like someone who'd seen too much, lived too long. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room before they landed on me. For a moment, I thought nothing of it. It was just a stranger, after all. But then, something about the way he looked at me made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like he knew me. Like he knew what I'd been through. He walked toward my table without hesitation, sitting down across from me without asking. I stiffened instinctively, my grip tightening around the cup. "I don't think you're supposed to be here," he said, his voice low but firm. The words struck me with a force I wasn't prepared for. I stared at him, unsure how to respond. How does he know? "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he could see the truth beneath my facade. He knew. He knew what I was running from. "You've seen them," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on mine. "The ghosts. The sailors." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words failed me. His gaze didn't waver, though, and something in his eyes told me that he wasn't just guessing. He knew. "How do you?" I started, but the man raised a hand, cutting me off. "It's not just you. They come for anyone who gets too close. Anyone who lingers too long by the lighthouse." He leaned in, his voice dropping lower, almost a whisper now. They're trapped there, but they follow. You can't escape them. No one does. I swallowed hard, trying to push the panic down. The sailors, their twisted faces, their hollow eyes, their desperate cries, they had been haunting me every night since I left the island. I couldn't get away from them. Not even here. Not even in this small, quiet town. Who are you? I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. How do you know this? The man smiled, but it was a hollow smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. I've been where you are. I've seen what you've seen. His voice dropped again, thick with something like regret. And I wish I could say you could escape it. But I can't. The words hit me like a blow to the chest. A part of me wanted to bolt out of the cafe, to run far away and never look back, but I stayed rooted to my seat. This man, he knew something. He had answers. You can't escape it, he repeated, his tone darkening. Not until you know what happened. What the lighthouse really is. The chill in the air grew colder, sharper, and the weight of it seemed to settle in the very bones of the cafe. The coffee cup in my hand suddenly felt too heavy, as though the world around me was pressing down on me, tightening. You're still being watched, he continued. They won't leave you. Not until you understand the curse. It's not just the island, not just the lighthouse. It's something deeper, something older. A flicker of recognition stirred inside me. The words he spoke sounded almost familiar, like they had come from the dark corners of my mind, whispered to me by the ghosts themselves. Something deeper. Something older. The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. The island feeds on souls. The lighthouse, it's more than a structure. It's a prison. And those who fall into its grasp are forever bound to it. I felt the room close in around me. The air seemed to thicken, the pressure in my chest rising. I wanted to scream, to run, to get as far away from this man and his words as I could. But I couldn't. There was something in his voice that demanded my attention, something that made my pulse race and my breath catch in my throat. You should leave, he said, his tone softening, almost as though he were pitying me. Get as far away as you can. You're not safe here, either. The ghosts, they're always watching. They're always waiting. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I couldn't leave, that I was already trapped in the grip of the island. But the truth was clear now. The ghosts were here with me, in this town, in this cafe. I could feel them watching me, their cold eyes on my back, their voices whispering through the very air around me. Before I could say anything more, the man stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He gave me one last look, an unreadable expression, and then turned and walked out the door, vanishing into the fog that had begun to roll off the water. I sat there, trembling, my hands still clutching the cold coffee cup. The words he'd spoken echoed in my mind, relentless and unforgiving. I tried to shake them off, but the truth had been spoken. The ghosts weren't just part of the island, they were a part of me now. And they were never going to leave. I stood up slowly, the weight of his words pressing heavily on me. The cafe felt empty now, as if something had shifted in the air while I wasn't looking. I turned toward the door, but I didn't need to look out at the misty shore to know. The lighthouse was out there, watching, waiting, just like the ghosts. And no matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it would always be there, behind me, in my mind, in my soul. I was never truly free. Not now. not ever. The days blurred together like a smear of paint on a forgotten canvas. I tried to go about my life, walking the streets of the town, speaking with the locals, even trying to sleep, but nothing felt real. The town felt like a stage, and I, an actor desperately trying to remember my lines. I could hear their whispers in the quiet spaces of my mind. The sailors. The ghosts. Their hollow voices echoing in my thoughts, reminding me of the lighthouse. Sometimes, I would be walking down the street, and the air would thicken, the light would flicker, and the faintest whisper of wind would sound like a voice calling my name. "Are you here, too?" I asked, not sure if I was speaking to anyone in particular or to the shadows that clung to the corners of my vision. "Are you still here?" I wasn't sure anymore. Was it a memory, or was it real? Had I left the island? Had I left the lighthouse? The line between the world I had known and the one I now found myself in had long since faded, like the fading echoes of a bell that had roamed too long in the distance. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the walls. The silence was deafening, but somehow it wasn't empty. The walls seemed to hum, faintly at first, like the quiet buzz of electricity, but growing louder as the minutes passed. My eyes flicked to the window. The street outside was quiet, as it always was, empty, save for the occasional car. But the hum didn't stop. I got up, walking over to the window, pulling back the curtain. Nothing was there. The street was as lifeless as it had been when I'd first arrived. Yet the hum persisted. It wasn't just in my ears, it was inside my head, wrapped around my thoughts, pulling at my sanity. The hum grew louder, more insistent, until it felt as though my skull was vibrating with it. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to push the noise away, but it wouldn't stop. It was the sound of the island, of the lighthouse, of the souls trapped there, reaching for me. I turned away from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. Was it the lighthouse calling me? Or had I never really left at all? The thought twisted inside me, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. Could I have escaped? Could I ever truly leave? I stumbled back to the couch, my legs shaking beneath me. Everything around me was starting to look unfamiliar. The walls of the apartment, the floor beneath my feet, it all felt too real, too solid. But the way the shadows bent at the corners of my vision made me question that. The sensation of being watched returned. It was subtle at first, just a presence in the room. But then it grew, like a rising tide that crept up my legs, my chest, until it was suffocating. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. "It's just the curse," I whispered, but I wasn't sure if I was reassuring myself or trying to convince the invisible eyes that had never left me. "It's just the curse." But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't alone. The figure stood at the far end of the room, its form tall and thin, obscured by the shadows. The features were indistinct, but I knew who it was. I knew what it was. A sailor. I froze. My blood ran cold as the figure stepped closer, its footsteps slow and deliberate. The room seemed to grow darker with each step it took, until the very air felt heavy, thick with the smell of salt water and decay. I tried to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as though the air itself had turned to lead, pinning me to the couch. The figure was almost upon me now, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. "Not again," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Not again." The sailor's face was still shadowed, but the pain in its eyes was unmistakable. It reached toward me, its cold fingers brushing against my skin, and I felt the weight of its touch deep in my bones. The chills spread through me, like ice seeping into my veins. "You can't escape," the sailor's voice rasped, its tone hollow, as if it were coming from the depths of the ocean itself. "You are still bound." I wanted to scream, to fight, but my voice caught in my throat. The words rang in my mind, echoing with an unnatural clarity. "You are still bound." The room around me began to shift, the walls warping as though they were made of water. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of the sea. The sound of waves crashing against rocks filled the room, growing louder and louder until it felt as though the ocean itself was swallowing me whole. I reached out, trying to grasp onto something solid, anything to anchor me. But the shadows seemed to swallow my hands, pulling me deeper into the darkness. The figure loomed over me, its face now clear, twisted with agony and desperation. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out, only a flood of water poured from its throat, rushing over me, drowning me. I gasped for air, but the water filled my lungs, choking me. The walls of the apartment dissolved, replaced by the crashing waves and the cold, dark ocean. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the world around me fell silent. I was back in the apartment. The sailor was gone. The air was still. But the hum, the ever-present hum, still buzzed inside my skull, relentless and gnawing. I tried to rise, but my legs were weak. I collapsed back into the couch, staring blankly at the walls. Was I still there? Was I still trapped? Was I awake, or was this another illusion? The line between reality and the curse had blurred completely. The lighthouse, its curse, hadn't just claimed the island. It had claimed me, too. And I wasn't sure if I had ever truly left. The days that followed were a blur. I wandered through my life, existing but not truly living. The world around me seemed like a distant memory, a dream that I couldn't fully remember or escape. The faces of the people I once knew felt like strangers, and the places that had once been home now seemed foreign, alien. My body moved through them, but my mind remained on the island, on the lighthouse, on the ghosts that still haunted me. It had been weeks since I had left, but the curse had never truly let go. The sailor's words echoed in my mind, a constant, gnawing reminder of the island's grip on me. You are still bound. The island, the lighthouse, it was all still with me. I could hear the wind howling across the rocks, the waves crashing against the shore. The shadows, the presence of the lost souls, they were always there, waiting just beyond the edges of my perception. I could feel them, watching, whispering, pulling at me. I tried to push it all away. I tried to convince myself that I was free, that the island was nothing more than a nightmare I had left behind. But every time I closed my eyes, the lighthouse would appear. Its beacon would flash in the darkness, and the ghosts would gather around me, their hollow eyes staring, pleading, desperate. The worst part wasn't the ghosts, it was the question that had begun to consume me. A question that I couldn't answer, no matter how hard I tried. Why had I left? I could feel it deep inside, an unsettling truth that had started to take root in my soul. I had fled the island, yes. I had escaped the ghosts, but I hadn't escaped the curse. And the more I tried to deny it, the more it gnawed at me. I wasn't free. I was just a pawn in a game that I could never win. The thought twisted in my chest. I could feel the weight of it, heavy like a stone, sinking deeper with every passing hour. The only way to end it, to stop the haunting, was to return. The lighthouse. The island. The ghosts, they were still waiting for me. But would it even end? Would returning destroy the curse, or would it trap me there forever, bound to the island just like the sailors, lost to the depths of the sea? I stood at the edge of the pier, looking out over the water. The sky was dark, the waves crashing violently against the rocks below. The wind howled, tugging at my clothes, and I felt the familiar pull, that eerie, magnetic draw that I had tried so desperately to escape. I knew what I had to do. There was no other choice. The curse had already claimed me. There was no going back. The island was my fate, my destiny. If I wanted to end it, to stop the cycle from continuing, I had to return. I had to go back to the lighthouse. With a final, heavy breath, I turned toward the boat dock nearby. The old wooden vessel that had taken me away from the island weeks ago now seemed like my only means of salvation. I didn't know if I would survive. I didn't know if the ghosts would claim me or if the curse would break. But I knew one thing: if I stayed, if I tried to continue living this hollow existence, I would be haunted forever. The ghosts would never leave me. The lighthouse would never let me go. The decision was made. I stepped onto the boat, the weight of my choice settling on my shoulders like a shroud. The engine roared to life, cutting through the silence as I headed out toward the island once more. The lighthouse loomed on the horizon, its light flashing in the distance like a beacon calling me home. As I approached, I could see the dark shape of the island emerging from the mist, the jagged rocks and towering cliffs rising out of the sea like a dark sentry. The lighthouse stood tall, its beam cutting through the fog. I was close now, closer than I had ever been. The island called to me, the ghosts beckoning, urging me to return. But even as I neared, I felt a strange sense of peace. The choice had been made. I was no longer running. The boat drew closer to the shore, and I could see the outline of the lighthouse keeper standing on the rocks, waiting. His form was shrouded in shadow, but I knew it was him. The keeper, the one who had warned me. The one who had trapped me here in the first place. The boat creaked and groaned as it hit the shore, and I stepped out onto the wet rocks. The wind howled around me, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore a constant, deafening roar. I made my way toward the lighthouse, my steps slow, deliberate. The ghosts were all around me now, their forms flickering in the fog, their hollow eyes watching me. I could hear their voices, whispers, cries for help, desperation. The door of the lighthouse creaked open, and I stepped inside. It was colder than I remembered, the air thick with a strange, otherworldly presence. The walls seemed to pulse, as though the lighthouse itself was alive, breathing. And then, I saw him, the keeper. He stood at the top of the spiral staircase, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He was waiting for me. "You came back," he said, his voice like gravel, rough and hollow. "You had no choice." I didn't respond. I just stared at him, the weight of everything, the ghosts, the curse, the island, pressing down on me. This was the moment. The final choice. And then, something unexpected happened. The ground trembled beneath me, the lighthouse shaking as if it were coming alive. The light at the top of the tower flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. The ghosts screamed, their cries growing louder, more frantic. The keeper smiled, a twisted grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You wanted to end it. But it's too late." Before I could react, the lighthouse began to collapse, the walls cracking and groaning, the floor splitting open. I tried to run, to escape, but the ground gave way beneath me. I plunged into the darkness, the cold, salty water of the ocean rushing up to meet me. I never saw the surface again. The lighthouse had claimed me. The curse had won. And the cycle continued. This has been a long, dark journey through the night with Whisper Crowley. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Leave a like if these stories made you look at the darkness a little differently, and share in the comments what you enjoyed most or what gave you chills. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next Sinister Whispers. Until we meet again in the world of shadows.